at the end of the day, in my metrics, if you don't win anything and your team doesn't do very well, you're number one, you have no achievements to your name, and number two, your average rating is probably going to get quite a bit lower because your team is just not performing well.
Welcome to another episode of Geographically Challenged. Now, this one is a very exciting episode. I'm hoping nothing goes wrong because I've got like a metric shit ton of graphics in my OBS right now because I'm going to go through this sort of individually and whatever. So hopefully nothing breaks. Anyway, great news is we've got the usual crew back. We've got Pilsky and Bleh. Pilsky recovering from a hangover, as you can see. He's looking a bit dusty today. Bleh has teleported into some comic realm, and he's currently having his internet being fixed. So he's going to have a bit of, I don't know, potential issues as we go through this. But hopefully, he'll be able to stick it out. I thought, because the way that we started Geographically Challenged earlier on this year, I thought it would be nice to sort of finish the year in a very similar fashion, right? So that's why we've got Nick back. Obviously, he's also the founder, CEO, whatever it may be, of CSGO to Asia. He's quite involved with Paper Rex, as you might end up seeing by virtue of some of the players that got voted into the top 20 by him. But it's great to have you back as well, Nick, because we haven't spoken to you for a while. And also, yes, he did maybe bribe us with some merch. Pilsky and I have received it. It's fantastic. I wore it on a DreamHack show as well. Look, just how are you going, Nick? Because it's been a little while since we spoke to you. So
just repping it.
And Bleh. Well, so there you go. You must be feeling pretty good, right? CSGO to Asia, popping off.
Dude. See, hey, just full disclosure, I didn't ask them to wear this. I just kind of figured we'd have hive mind going on and try to change it up by wearing my hat instead of the hoodie. But yeah, it's been a good year. I really can't complain. No regrets, honestly. It's been tough. Been busy as hell. Paper Rex keeping me busy. CSGO to Asia. We just relaunched a new site. And we're just, nose to the grindstone, preparing for a big 2021, and hopefully we'll see more LAN events, and I'll be seeing you guys sooner rather than later.
That would be the dream. I do want to say, by the way, I thought about wearing the CSGO to Asia shirt, but then I realized you're not going to see it anyway. It's literally just going to be a black shirt. Yeah. So I was like, whatever. I won't get changed. Anyways, so everyone, is probably here not to hear who you are and why we love you and why you keep sending us merch and that kind of thing. They're all here to hear who is the top 20 players from Asia and ANZ. Now, some people might look at this and go, why are you even bothering doing that? And I guess there is no real good reason, right? But theoretically, they're not going to be top 20 players in the world. In fact, probably none of them would make it into the top 20. But that's pretty much the reason, actually, why I wanted to do this, is because, we do see all those top 20s with HLTV and whatnot. And, JKS has been in there and such in previous years and that kind of thing. But you never really get a good understanding of where these players in our region might be sitting, as far as maybe some of the top pundits and people might be concerned. So I thought this was maybe a fun sort of little niche that we can fill. Also like to sort of use it as a way to stroke our own dick because we get to pretend that people care about our opinions. So that's good. The main thing that I want to say before we get into this, though, is it's really just a good conversation point, regardless of whether, you want to take this 100% seriously or not. I think based on what I've seen from the list that we've got, I think it's pretty accurate. There's probably a few players that could be up there, a few players that could be dropped off. But by and large, I think most people are going to agree with us. And I'll be interested to know. So, obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're in Twitch chat right now, you can let us know what you think of our picks. And, we'll obviously discuss those as we go. And to obviously give you a bit of an understanding of how we're going about this as well, there was a couple of parameters before we jump into it. So first, we couldn't choose any players that were not competing domestically. So obviously the players in 100 Thieves, like JKS, not available to choose here. Same for Bntet. They had to be playing in Asia and ANZ. The Asia and ANZ regions are essentially combined as far as this list is concerned. So it's your top 20 from Asia and ANZ. And all of our panelists, including myself, have given me the top 20 that they chose. I allocated a point to each placement. So first in whatever ranking got 20 points, and then the 20th person got 1 point, and then we put them all together, averaged it out, and essentially that's going to dictate what this ranking is. So the only other thing to really touch on there is, I guess, some of the points that got collated, as you'll see as we go through the list, were actually a tie. So I did have 2 tiebreakers for us to decide, who's maybe 15th versus 16th or whatever. And the first one was the number of votes. So in my opinion, I think it's more impactful if, let's say, I might have voted for X player and put them in 6th place and they would have got 20 points or 15 points or something. Whereas Pilsky and Bleh might have put the same player in 7th, and, they might have had the same amount of points, but there was 2 of them. So I've said that's a bit of a higher value, I suppose, rather than just one person having a really high ranking. So basically, 5 plus 5 is greater than one person getting a 10, if that makes sense. I don't really explain that very well, but I think you get what I mean. And then if that was even still equal, so for example, both players got 3 votes, then it was based on the highest rank that they got by an individual panelist. So if I had someone in first and the other guy's highest was second, he would technically take the tiebreaker there. So yeah, those are the tiebreakers. Much of a muchness really, but I thought it was just important that people understand before we get into this exactly why one person might be above another, even though they're on the same points tally. Anyways, obviously we've been talking a lot, so let's get into the discussion at hand. First, I want to give a shout out to a few of the honourable mentions, and we'll do some more honourable mentions at the end. But because the 3 guys here, apart from me, don't know the top 20, it's kind of hard for them to give their honourable mentions until we've gone through the list. But the honourable mentions that didn't make the list, but got a substantial enough amount of points to warrant a shout out here were Gas, Devai, Xiaosaga, Cabal, Ricky, Ustillo, Mitsuha, and Malta. So those are the players that didn't quite make it into the top 20, but definitely got a few votes. Did you need to use both the tiebreakers? Yes, I did need to use both the tiebreakers. That's why they exist. If I didn't have to use them, I wouldn't have needed to make them. So anyways, the way we're going to do this is we're going to go from 16 to 20, and then we're going to go 11 to 15, and then from 10 onwards, we're going to go one by one. So hopefully that makes sense. So let's start things off, and hopefully nothing breaks while we go. So I will now announce the 16th to 20th best ANZ and Asian players of 2020. Obviously starting off with a tie. So, it was all problematic from the start. And the reason that this one is actually tied, you won't see any actual ties apart from this one. The only reason this one was there was because both players only got 1 vote and both players got ranked in the same spot. So the 2 tiebreakers that I did decide basically didn't work. And I was like, fuck it. We've got a tie for 20. I'm just going to put them both there. I can't really get rid of both of them. Now, I will say, I think one of them probably doesn't deserve to be in the top 20 and may have received a biased vote from one of our panelists. I won't say who. But Benkai and Flying are the 20th best player in ANZ and Asia so far this year. Now, Flying was a player who did really, really well earlier on in this year. We thought he was great. We were watching Invictus Gaming. We were very, very excited about what they were going to be able to do. And they sort of fell off a little bit at the end. Now, I personally didn't actually have Flying in my top 20, but I looked back at some of the stats. He was the highest rated player in Weibo Cup, so he was a pretty solid choice, I think. I don't necessarily agree with Benkai, by the way. I don't think that he was playing in enough top tier tournaments to warrant a top 20 placing, but he received more points than anyone else. So there you go. So I don't know who actually voted for Benkai and Flying, but maybe you guys want to give us a bit of a TLDR on your thoughts, a penny for your thoughts.
Penny. Well, I think it's pretty obvious of one of the people who voted, so I'll let the other person go first.
I'm surprised Flying's at a 20th position, in all honesty, right? I feel like Invictus, despite not really having had many wins, or any wins for that matter, so to speak, some of their placings, if you look at some of the RMR events, overall, some of the big upset wins they've had over the likes of, I think they're up there with Tyloo, Vici, Tiger on their good day. And who else? I think Invictus are the only constant force in the Chinese Asian region. And Flying is the best player by far on that team. We thought Viva would kind of be the breakout star for this team this year. That wasn't the case. Flying was the reason they were able to, pull off some upset wins over maybe a Vici, over Tyloo. Again, very inconsistent team, but the fact that Flying's able to play at that level against the best players in China, in Asia in particular, I voted for him. In fact, I think I put him in my top 10. I did put him in the 10th position for me personally. So I'm a little surprised he was a little further down the thing. I have to agree with you, Jordan. Benkai, 20th place. I don't think he deserves it. I love the guy. I think it was fantastic a few years ago. He just hasn't done enough this year. Not at all.
Yep. All right, Nick, then it's your turn to justify why Benkai deserved to be in the top 20.
Yeah, I'll just start by saying this was really hard to do.
Very hard.
Like, there were so many players that you want to put in that you're like scratching your head, and then you look back and like, well, he didn't play anything this year. Obviously, bias aside, and knowing Benkai and knowing his capabilities because I work closely with him in Paper X, but it was just looking at, he entered the scene this year having not played that much, and he's been performing well for the few games that he has played. On top of that, it's a role change for him. Like, he's IGLing for the team right now, so it's like it's not just based on his in-game performance, but also his overall, like holistically. I mean, I can see why he doesn't deserve to be in the top 20. I put him in there just because I was, again, it was like a toss-up between a few other players, and then when I look at it, I'm like, all right, Benkai is better than that player, but maybe that player had a better year overall. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense that he's in that 20th position. He could be just basically sitting outside of there, right? Like 25, 24, something like that. But that's really it.
Okay. Anyway, I don't think it matters too much. Like, I don't want to touch a whole lot on the 16 to 20. I mean, obviously there's some interesting topics here, but I don't think we need to spend as much time as we will maybe on some of the higher rated players. So we got scoring here. I think he's had a pretty good year. I think he's been someone that has stood out amongst the team that he played on as one of the better players in that roster. Again, I don't think I actually put him in my top 20, but I was definitely considering it. And the only reason I didn't really do that was because I didn't think that D13 had that many results of particular note compared to some of the other players that I felt probably warranted a bit of a higher placing. But I don't think that's a bad shout. Did you have him in your team, Pilsky? Was he in yours at all?
Score? Actually, none of those three players I had in my top 20. I actually even forgot to give Flying an honourable mention, to be honest, but he's made it into the list. Yeah, I found this very challenging, particularly for the Asia thing, due to the division of tournaments and the invite system that we've had for quite a long time. So I decided that I would take an approach based on the stats for the most part, as well as what they actually achieved in terms of tournament wins. The fact is that Score, although he's been a good player on his team, at the end of the day, in my metrics, if you don't win anything and your team doesn't do very well, you're number one, you have no achievements to your name, and number two, your average rating is probably going to get quite a bit lower because your team is just not performing well. So Score didn't make it into my list, although I did give him an honourable mention.
Indeed. Olivia also, I think, for me, was probably more of an honourable mention player rather than a top 20 player. But again, this is why we've got a panel of experts, not just my opinion. Here's
the thing. I'm very surprised to see Olivia in there. And you guys know that I love my Thai CS, but I feel that Olivia in the top 20 players in Asia this year, no bloody way. No bloody way. In Asia and ANZ, I don't think he deserves a spot, to be honest. I don't think he's played very well this year at all. And I don't think Beyond's done very well, to be honest. Last year, I would have whacked him in there for sure. But yeah, I don't think he's deserved of that spot.
I put him in the 15th place, and I have to kind of like on a hindsight agree with Pilsky. Like achievement-wise, they didn't do anything. This is more of an eye test for me with the fact that Beyond is a team. Even though they struggled, all the tournaments, especially the RMR events, which I did both of, and these are like long events, right? They played like 20 plus best of threes against everyone in Asia. He was a standout player. Like he was fantastic against almost all the teams. Like the only reason Beyond were even like close results against some of the top tier teams was because of Olivia. So I think he was the only SCA player, like the Southeast Asian player I picked. He is. He was by far the standout player from Southeast Asia.
It's kind of crazy how different our perspectives are on these players, because the tournaments that I watch, because obviously we work different events, like you were working the Perfect World stuff. The tournaments that I watch, Yeah, the tournaments I watched, Olivia was not great at all, but I think he must just want to perform for you, Bleh. You know, you must get him going, man.
It's part of the reason
really
why
likes me.
It's part of the reason why we've got, 4 people here. And actually another part of the reason why I got Nick on was because I felt like there might be a bit of an ANZ bias if it was me and Pilski and then just Bleh. So I was like, maybe we should have 2 people from the Asia region, 2 people from the ANZ region.
You know what's funny about that, Jordan? I mean, you've seen my list, right?
Yes,
I think I have more Asian people in it than I do ANZ. So there you go.
I think I do as well, actually. So that may be
also
interesting.
Also, between the 3 of us, I mean, including Nick as well to a certain degree, we would have watched every game of Asian Counter-Strike, apart from like some of the more unknown, tiny little Chinese cups, which isn't really broadcasted, right? Apart from that, I think we have like casted or we've watched every single Asian game or Asian ANZ game this entire year. So yeah, fun stuff.
The only ANZ games that I didn't watch were like ESEA and LPL, but I watched all of the other ones. And I even did watch a couple of the ESEA games, just, when I saw it on and that kind of thing. So, but I think, the bigger tournaments are the ones that I found more relevant. And I think it's probably important to clarify my stance on where I ranked my players was, for me, a lot of it was down to the eye test as well. Like it was just more of a feeling kind of thing as opposed to, oh, this guy's got a 1.17 rating. This guy's got a 1.18 rating. Like he's a little bit better, that kind of thing. But, obviously everyone has a different way of ranking things, which is good, I think. And that's why it kind of comes together a little bit as an average. And it's good to have everyone's differing opinions coming together and having a bit of a discussion about it. Now, I think one that we can probably all agree on is Dobu in the top 20. I was actually not sure if I was going to put Dobu in my top 20, but then he had a really, really good tournament in DreamHack Winter for Tiger right at the end there. So I thought, okay, well, he just snuck into mine. I think he might have been like 18 or 17 somewhere. So he just snuck in for me. He had a really good year at the start as well. He started off well. Tiger won a Road to Rio. They won Weibo Cup. Yep. So you got to remember, like, this is the 2020 ranking, not just last 6 months of 2020. That's again a thing. It's like recency bias is probably going to come into effect. And so I did try to remember, like, how did I feel 9 months ago or 10 months ago? And I think Dobu definitely was up there for all of us at that point in time. So I'm quite happy to see him there. And I think 17th is not a bad spot for him, to be honest.
Yeah, I'll just like to add to that about Dobu. I mean, Erkast just left Tiger, right? And everyone's kind of looking at Tiger now like, oh, they don't have it now that Erkast has left. But look at what they've achieved since Erkast has left, right? It's not a bad showing. No. And Dobu is the one who's actually taken the reins as captain and the IGL of that team. So, he's really stepped forward and stepped up in that sense. He's a skilled player, that's for sure. I would say, like, in the last 2 years, he's always been someone that I think is in the top 20, like, aside from AU players, right? But just generally looking at the Mongolian scene, the Chinese players, like Dobu has always sort of kept up with the meta, kept up with his skill. So yeah, I actually put him as 18 on my list, and so he's got the 17th spot. I think that's well deserved.
I put him 20th because in my system I wanted to weight in tournament wins quite highly. So a player like Flying, who I think is actually one of the better Chinese players, didn't make it into my list at all. But Dobu, he's won a couple of tournaments. He's had some good placings. He's had better placings than Invictus, even if he's been less consistently there through no fault of his own. You have to take into account that, unfortunately, Tiger winning 2 back-to-back tournaments weren't invited to the following tournaments.
Yeah.
Big talking point that was.
Yeah, I think I had him a little too high, actually. I think I had him in my 14th position. And again, just same thing. Like the reason I looked at Tiger's results they had, the ones where they actually did well. And he was instrumental, right? It wasn't just Erkast alone. It was Cabal, it was Dobu as well. So I think 17 is a good spot. 16, 17th for Dobu is good.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I had him in 18th. So I think most of us had him like in that 18 to 20 region. And the reason that he got bumped up into 17 was
That's because of me.
Your placement. But I don't think it's unreasonable. And to be honest, again, like he's equal there with Olivia. Olivia didn't get the same amount of votes, whereas Dobu got 4 votes. Like he was on all of our top 20s. Whereas Olivia only got 2. So that's why Dobu's just a little bit higher, even though, like, on average, he got a lower placing because, obviously he only got 14 points, whereas Olivia got 14 points out of 2 votes. I still think it's actually worth more that we all put him in the ranking because I think that's a bit more of a consistent thing. So Dobu number 17 and Zhoking number 16 then is, again, you know, I was kind of debating with Zhoking. I wasn't so sure because he did have a really rough run of form during the middle stages of the year, but he's come good towards the end. He's had a lot of good performances in terms of results, so that also sort of factored in. I felt like Vici, even despite getting wrecked by Tai Lu, you got to consider that like they've had a really, really good year. I didn't actually put him that high. I think he was quite a bit lower down for me. Yeah, he was in 17th for me. I know a couple of you have him a little bit higher than that, but I think he's definitely a top 20 player this year. I just don't think, you know, he's like not a top 10, obviously. So I think he's in a pretty good spot here as well on this ranking.
I put him at number 9, and I actually considered putting him higher because when I went back, I looked through the statistics of every tournament in 2020. That doesn't include, like in Oceania, for example, I didn't include ESEA, I didn't include ANZ Champs. I wanted to try to make the tournaments comparable in terms of them being similar to RMR events, DreamHacks, those kind of things. So like double elimination bracket. I did include Perfect World, even though that was a bit of a longer format. And if you go back and you look at a lot of these big tournaments this year, two very important things is, I mean, number one, Vici Gaming placed well in every tournament, without a doubt. Even though they had a bad matchup against Tai Lu, they always consistently placed well. Mm-hmm. They very rarely bombed out. Number two, if you go look at HLTV, you go back through those tournaments, and look at the top 8 players of each of those tournaments, you'll be surprised how many times Zhoking shows up and how high he is up in the overall stats. And I think that's because he actually bashes the group stage a lot of the time, or if he's versing an underdog opponent, you'll see a 20 bomb half from Zhoking. But your brain tricks you into thinking, at least for me, I had this bias against Zhoking because I watch him play against Tai Lu and he doesn't play up to scratch sometimes, so he has a rough run of form. But in reality, overall, he's actually a very good player and he actually has very, very consistently high levels of stats up there with some people that you might think are actually better than him. And not to mention the fact that at the end of the year, this last tournament that we just had, DreamHack, was it? The last one we did, DreamHack Winter. The whole tournament, he had a 1.5 rating at the end of the tournament. 1.5. That's fucking insane, dude. That's like better. That's better than Kaze. That's better than any of these other cunts. He fucking smashed it.
Peak Zhoking for sure.
I will point out that he was the highest rated player at DreamHack Winter. So that was his probably his best performance of the year. Obviously, for the rest of the players above him, there's a lot of, we'll touch on some of their highest ratings because I think that's kind of important. If you're the top rated player in any given tournament, that's kind of a big deal. And for some of them, you'll see that they're recurring quite a lot. That's why they're up the top. Anyways, yeah, look, I think that's reasonable, Pilski. I don't necessarily disagree. I did have him a bit lower, obviously, than you. I think you do, to be like a top player, to be a top 10 player, to be a top 5 player, you probably need to be performing in those big games. So for me, that's part of the reason why he wasn't as high. But I think we probably did give him a bit of a bad rap comparatively. When you go back and look in hindsight, he might not have been as bad as we thought he was during that really, really rough period. Just because he never showed up in those grand finals. That for me was the major sticking point that I was always like, if you're not going to show up in the grand final, what's the point of having you on the team? But I think now he's actually turned that form around. And so obviously he's in the top 16 here for us. And I think he's deserving of a 16th place or maybe even a little bit higher, but I still don't think it's a bad spot for him, to be honest.
Well, it's interesting because remember when we were doing our super Chinese teams, like all of us were laughing about Zhoking and we're like, should he even be on this team?
Yeah.
But I guess in hindsight, yeah, why not? I mean, he had a pretty good year, like you said, Pili. I mean, whenever I think of Zhoking, I think of him with his form back in like 2017, 2018. Because like from what I remember last year, it seemed like he was on the down. Didn't seem like he was deserving of a spot on Vici, but I guess, yeah, like you said, they've definitely been the most consistent Asian team this year, right? Even though they had this barrier of Tai Lu for the first half of the year, but like you said, even like every time they got invited, every placement, it's like second, third, until they finally broke that barrier and beat Tai Lu. But Tai Lu had a couple of weird results throughout the year, right? Like there was some event, I forget which one it was, one of those random Chinese events. They like bombed out in the group stage.
Yeah, it was like Weibo Cup, and then there was also the that qualifier. What was the qualifier?
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. I'll have to look at Wikipedia or something. But yeah, to that point, I mean, Vici as a whole has definitely performed the best, and so I see your point about like the emphasis on results makes sense.
I also kind of I don't know if you can do this in HLTV. I want to know if someone knows how to do this, please like tell me on Twitter. But I'd almost like to take Zhoking's like rating and just minus the Tai Lu series and see if he had something like fucking insane, like some ridiculous rating like 1.3 or some shit. Because he only really seemed to choke against Tai Lu.
WDNMD, maybe that's the one. Yeah, potentially. But there was also
WDNMD.
What was the qualifier that I can't remember what it was. Never mind. It doesn't matter. Totally beside the point. Anyway, let's keep things rolling along here because we've spent about 25 minutes talking about 16 to 20. So if we keep doing that, we're going to be here for 2 hours. Bleh's disconnected, by the way. He'll be back. He's having those internet issues that we thought we might get to. So that's why Pilski's camera went a little bit crazy as well. So here's our 11 to 15th place. And funny that in 16 to 20, we didn't have any ANZ players. Now, this is where you're going to start to see some of those ANZ players cropping up. And there are definitely quite a few in the top 10 as well. So we have Hatz in 15th. Auman did win the tiebreaker by getting a couple more votes or potentially even a higher ranking from someone than what Hatz did. Some are in 13, Attacker in 12, Sterling in 11. But it's still a fairly like close group. Like I think from 11 to 20, like there's a few packs, if that makes sense. But in terms of the difference between like Sterling's only got 4 more votes than Attacker. Attacker and Summer are the exact same. Auman and Hatz are the exact same. So these are like almost dice rolls, almost coin flips in terms of who got placed where. But Hatz, you know, we'll start off with him. Obviously, the newest player in that Renegades roster. I think he's had a good year. You know, it hasn't been phenomenal as far as his like level of performance has been concerned. I don't think he's necessarily overperformed what his normal level was in previous teams, but I don't think you can argue against the level that Renegades have had as a team this year. So for me, a lot of the reason I have Hatz in my top 20 was because of the results that Renegades was able to get. And by the way, I also did have Malta in my top 20. Like I said, he didn't actually make it into our overall top 20. But I think if you go on a 10, in fact, it was actually 11 games, 11 tournaments domestic win streak. Like you have to be up there in some respect. It's almost inarguable when these other teams are not even getting close to you, you know, so you've got to be doing something right. So for me, Hatz was in there definitely, and I think he deserves a spot in the top 20 this year for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with you. He had a rough run of tournaments for a little while, but exactly like you said, at the end of the day, if you're winning all of the tournaments, you're doing something right. And I didn't have Malta in my top 20, and after I made my top 20 based on the metrics that I used, I almost felt like it's kind of like robbed, to be honest, because of the rating that he gets and the roles that he plays. But end of the day, I had Hatz on my list, number 1, because he's won everything. And number 2, because of the metrics that I used, where I was looking at the top 8 players from each tournament. Hatz shows up reasonably frequently, more, and maybe that's because of Renegades' success. But at the same time, he's also a player who frags above his means in a role where he doesn't occupy a lot of space, I don't think. Like he often is playing that anchor role. He's often, you know, creating space for other people in the team and things like that. And you still frequently see him in the top 8 players of the tournament.
Yeah, definitely a very, very good player. And a nice addition to that Renegades roster. We have Auman in 14th. Nick, I want to give this one to you too, because you haven't actually spoken, but you didn't actually have him in your roster. So it's a good thing that Bleh's back. Auman, did you have Auman in your top 20 player?
I did have him in top 20.
All right, well, tell us why, because he is our 14th placed player of the year.
I feel like overall, like if you look at the inconsistencies between Zhoking and Auman, I think I had them close to each other, if I'm not mistaken, right next to each other.
Yeah, I actually had them right next to each other as well.
Yeah, for me, it's about the fact that both teams both players were instrumental whenever Vici had their wins, right? Of course, you have Kaze and Jamyoung, but it was more like either Auman steps up or Zhoking steps up. And at the end of the year, Auman was a beast, which you guys kept reminding me on Twitter as well. And I have to agree, he was very instrumental in them kind of turning the tides when it comes to them choking against Tai Lu. They were winning pretty convincingly. Auman was very instrumental. I think it was also the one player who managed to step up when even in losing effort against Tai Lu. Again, this is an eye test. I really can't remember the exact numbers of the games, but we saw like Kaze was looking human, Jamyoung wasn't anything spectacular, Zhoking didn't show up, Advent couldn't do much in the server because, you know, it is Advent, but Auman was pretty convincing overall, even though, like I said, you know, he wasn't there like all the time, he had ups and downs, but when the team was generally struggling, Auman was stepping up quite a bit. It's just unfortunate that everyone else couldn't step up alongside him. So yeah, kind of like the reason for that. And of course, for me, a big boost for him was the end of the year. Like I said, the past 2-3 events, he was being just an absolute beast.
I agree. For me, a lot of it came down to him being able to turn his form around, and obviously the fact that the Vici results have been so good consistently in 2020. So I probably would have had him a little bit lower than I did end up putting him. I actually had him in 10th for my personal ranking. I would have had him a lot lower if he didn't have like 3 or 4 sick tournaments right at the end of the year. But for me, that was a big deal in terms of turning his form around. And so I think actually 14 is a pretty good representation of where he might have sat this year, in my opinion. You have anything for that one, Pilsky or Nick?
Yeah, so I mean, I actually didn't have it in my top 20, but he was one of those like just on the line type of players, right? Like I actually put him as an honorable mention because to what Bleh said, like I didn't really think much of him for most of the year until when we started seeing Vici win against Tai Lu, he was stepping up, and I think the reason why Vici was able to step up and beat Tai Lu, maybe they had an amazing pep talk or whatever, but it's because all players were firing on all cylinders, right? Like it really, when you have a player like Advent who's just the brain of the team, you need the other 4 to really step up. And at the start of the year, it was basically just Kaze and Jamyoung carrying that team, and Zhoking and Auman were having really inconsistent events. And so, yeah, I mean, based on just his performance towards the end of the year, I would say he's deserving, but I kind of looked at it from like the whole year. And I just felt like there are more standout Chinese players, a lot of the younger guys that now, like with Pili's assessment, it's based on results. Mine was more of like similar to Bleh, like an eye test, just looking at what they're bringing to the table, right? Individual plays and things like that. And
yeah,
when you see like specific players, say on the Invictus roster or some of the like Lin Vision, teams that don't really go far in tournaments, but like individually, those players I felt were better than someone like Auman. So that's why I didn't have it on my list.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about people like Ronan Baby, Mitsuha, Gas, these kinds of guys.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I don't think that that's unreasonable. Like, it's just a differing opinion of what makes a top 20 player. Like, is the top 20 results-wise, or is it individual-based? And I think I'd agree with you if we were talking purely as an individual level. I think someone like Ronan Baby, for example, he was like fucking insane. I was looking at something. He was playing on like Huatsai or something, and he was just dumbstering people. It was insane.
I mean, he came out of nowhere.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like, just like
I thought it was cheating, man. Some of those rounds were ridiculous.
But like, he didn't have any results, you know. So I didn't feel like I could put him in a top 20 list if he's not been even. He hasn't played in any top 4 tournaments. He hasn't even played really in a top 8 tournament this year in Asia. So
I think to add to that, one of the challenging things of this year, obviously with the pandemic, there has been no LANs and everything is online. And when you compare, like when you break it down region by region, like, you know, if you were just to go based purely on stats, then all the Renegades players deserve to be up there, right? But we know that that's obviously a stats bias because in Oceania, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have the top 3-4 teams and then everyone else is pretty much dog shit. And then you compare it to, like, you know, if Renegades and Order went up against Tai Lu and Vici, sure, there'd be times where Renegades would win, but there'd be equal amount of times where Vici or Tai Lu would win. But we had no way of assessing that this year at all, right? So it's like everything is isolated. So that's kind of how I was looking at it. I was looking at more isolated rather than how their performance was at an event or something like that, because the events themselves are just the same bloody teams over and over and over again, right?
Yeah, that's a big problem with the metrics that I use, is that my like metrics are all based on those top 4 tournaments, which means that it's automatically biased against like 95% of the scene, because they're just not even included. I'm not even looking at their performance or their results or their stats.
Yeah.
I'm not taking into account any of the tournaments that they played. So yeah, all of my picks in my top 20 are all players who played in those DreamHack IEM tournaments.
Also doesn't help that a lot of these events, like you touched on when you mentioned DreamHack as well, how many DreamHack Asia events have you had where it's just 4 teams invited, right?
Yeah.
No open faults, nothing. So it's kind of unfair, but I can also see why you have to go with it.
I mean, at the end of the day, they are the top 4 teams for a reason, right? Even if they're the ones that we really only get to see. The argument would be if there was a better team or good players underneath them, they would have qualified in that 4th spot, and we would have ended up seeing them at some point in time. So I kind of get it, but I also don't necessarily agree. I think you've got to take those results into account, regardless of how difficult it has been with COVID and stuff. The biggest problem with this is obviously the fact that we haven't had any Asia minors. So we haven't been, like, to be 100% honest with everyone, combining Asia and ANZ is a bit of like a piss take in a way, because we haven't seen those players play against each other at all this year. But look, again, it's more just as a thought experiment and kind of good content and discussion. So whatever, fuck the haters. Summer and Attacker. Now, these two go hand in hand, I feel like, and it's actually I think it's beautiful. It's like poetry that they're sitting together in 12th and 13th place. I think the reason Attacker is above Summer is because of me. I had Attacker actually quite high up in my ranking. He was 5th for me. I think he's been really, really good for Tai Lu. And the thing is, like, if it were not for these last 2 events this year, Tai Lu would have had a similar run to what Renegades did. So we might have even seen these guys a little bit higher than what they ended up being. It was a little disappointing how Tai Lu sort of fell off a cliff at the very end of 2020. But I thought Attacker was actually just a little bit better individually than Summer was. So I actually agree with my tiebreaker, funnily enough, that he would take that 12th spot as opposed to 13th. But yeah, I think both of them really go hand in hand, and they both seem to perform at a very, very good, solid, acceptable level for Tai Lu this year. And I think they improved on their performances from 2018 as well. So I would have been gobsmacked if they didn't make it into the top 20. And to be honest, I'm a little bit surprised that they didn't make it into the top 10 almost, in a way.
That's mainly for me because you have Renegades and you have VG, right? And you have a number of players. I agree with you that, you don't necessarily have to have all 5 players from these 2 teams over there, but VG have looked the best team so far, apart from some of the choking issues. Renegades, I mean, I don't even have to touch that one. And then you look at the Tai Lu players, the ones who really did step up, the ones who really did shine compared to Attacker or Summer, and Danking and Slowly are the obvious picks for me, right? In fact, I would have even picked Flying over these 2 players. I know the results don't really show up, but for me, it's more about the like an eye test based on what I see, how these players perform depending on, in certain scenarios. And yeah, I would probably rate a Flying even above an Attacker or Summer. 100% top 20, definitely not top 10, mainly because there are other players who are better than them. Attacker in particular, for me, again, I have a lot of like bias because of the RMR events, which I did, and they took like 2 months, like the 2 RMR events. So 2 months of my life of this year of 2020 was spent doing those 2 events. So I am very heavily biased with those 2 events, but they are valid events, right? These are very important events. And one thing I noticed from Attacker, he was very quiet. He really wasn't playing the level I expected to see of him. In fact, I even saw somebody have a rough RMR, then a better RMR in the next one. Summer was just there. He wasn't really terrible or neither that great. So for me, it was mainly Attacker and Summer who were like kind of like iffish, while it was Slowly and Danking and somebody who were the reason they were getting carried. Sure, you might have the big game here and so on and so forth from Attacker coming in, but he just wasn't consistent enough. And for me, it's just the same thing with Summer. Summer was more consistent, I feel like, but he didn't even have the highs that Attacker had. So I think I had it in like my 16th, 17th, thereabouts, somewhere around there.
17, 18, actually.
17, 18, yeah, there we go.
But you did have Attacker above Summer as well.
Yeah, a little bit, because his highs were what did manage to win them a few very clutch games, which where everyone else were kind of struggling a bit. So, yeah.
Pilski's on a different train of thought than us. You had some a little bit higher than attacker. But, you know, it's funny, right? Because, like, Nick didn't have either of these players in at all. And I think that continues to go with his, like, his methodology of what a top 20 player is. But, Pilski, for you, it must be a lot to do with the results that they had as well.
They're two of the most successful players in the region. And they also have an insanely consistent stat line across the whole year, across all of 2020. Every tournament, load up the stats page, top 8 players, summer and attacker are in there. Like, I was noting how many times and at what placing the players were in the top 8 rated players for that whole tournament. Summer and attacker are there almost every single time. I mean, I guess it's inflated because of Tyloo's success, similar to Renegades. But at the end of the day, results-wise, some of the most successful players in the whole region and some of the most consistent in terms of stats.
Yeah, indeed. All right, well, we've got Sterling at number 11, and this one might be one that Nick can touch on a little bit more, because I think you did have Sterling in your roster. I will say, unfortunately for Sterling, he did miss out on the top 10 by a bee's dick. And in my mind, Sterling,
the visual.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
He could have been in there. I had Sterling in 14th, which I think Sterling's a hard one to rank here, to be honest, because he was really good at the start of the year. Like, he might have been number 1 AWP in Australia for 3 or 4 months. He was fucking banging. Every single tournament, you'd be like, wow, this guy's sick. But lately, he has fallen off a little bit. So that's my reasoning for not having him quite as high as I otherwise would have. I would have liked to have put him in my top 10, to be honest. But I just couldn't quite justify putting Sterling that high. But I think 11, still not a bad shout, to be honest, at all. Considering Avant hasn't won anything at all this year, he's been able to get himself nearly a top 10 placing. That's pretty reasonable, I think.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't have a strong opinion on the Oceanic players because I didn't watch that much. I only watched, like grand finals of the big events here and there. So I know they played a lot this year within their region. And Sterling is a player that, when I noticed him come on the scene was like a couple of years ago. He was playing for Chiefs, if I'm not wrong.
Yep. I think he was playing. Well, yeah, he might have been playing on Chiefs, and then he went to Greyhound, and then he went to Avant.
And then
I think.
Avant, yeah. So I didn't think much of him when he was on Chiefs, and then I guess he grew as a player. He got some experience under his belt, and then, like you said, at the start of this year, I was watching some of the AU CS a little bit more, and I noticed him like, popping off, and I was like, oh, this guy's pretty good. And as an opper, I was looking at what does Asia have, and just trying to like picture him playing against the top teams like Vici and Tyloo and stuff. And of course, that's you need to really stretch your imagination for that. But then of course, part of my assessment was also looking at stats, and then he's up there, right? He's got like a 1.2 rating for the region, so that's pretty strong. I actually had him as 6th on my list, so I guess that's kind of what kept him closer to the 10th spot. But I think looking at the list that we have so far, anywhere from 11 to 15, I would say, is deserving for Sterling.
I'm surprised he's up there that high while Flying's not. Because for me, if you compare results-based sort of things, both of them are kind of similar, right? Both of them really star players for their respective teams. Neither of these two teams have really won a single tournament. And the ones they won where basically Renegades weren't there. I think they won MDL as well. They won a few events where it was mainly the other teams like Avant and Chiefs and whatnot. So if you look at the results, I know Sterling is higher rated compared to Mr. Flying. At the same time, it's very hard to gauge, right, how strong the opposition in Australia is right now compared to the Asian guys. But I'm a little surprised that Sterling's in 11th. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve that spot. I feel like he does deserve it. But I also feel like Flying should be next to him. Because if you look at these two players, I feel like they're kind of similar in where they fit in their respective regions, right? Star players of their own teams. Teams are like the second, third best in the region, have good moments, bad moments, but are just not able to, carry the team hard enough to get them to win. I feel like they're very similar that ways.
All right.
Yeah,
I
would kind of agree with that.
I want to jump in quickly here because I think the difference for me between Flying and Sterling is that Avant at least pushed Renegades on a reasonably consistent basis. That's my point of difference, by the way.
Fair.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I do see logic in Blair's argument. It makes me question my own ranking, to be honest. I think it's OC bias like creeping in, to be honest, about Sterling. But I think at the end of the day, with how I was doing my list, I was looking at the top 8 players, and guess which tournaments Sterling's not a top 8 player in the region at? The ones that Avant didn't get fucking invited to. Or didn't get to attend for whatever reason. So apart from that, he was incredibly consistent and he had a fucking insane rating. But at the same time, I will agree with Jordan. I think he's fallen off a little bit towards the end of the year. I think he's a tad too one-dimensional in terms of his play style, which can be a good and a bad thing because it brings consistency, but also, sometimes you need like a little bit more like variance in terms of the plays that you make to be a more effective player. So he's kind of a hard one because he's like this player that I feel like he just goes through the motions. He plays a very similar game every single time. He always gets his kills. There's a big difference between him having like a 30 bomb in a game and having very little impact and a 30 bomb where he's getting those fucking like monster 4Ks on the A side of Dust 2 against Renegades,
Yeah. All right, well, I did say he missed out on the top 10 by a bee's dick, and you're going to see why when I show you. Slowly is on 33 points as well. So this was another tiebreaker situation. And I got to say, I got to apologize to Sterling because it is actually my fault that he didn't get into the top 10. I was the one that had Slowly. I actually had Slowly up in 4th. Now, in hindsight, after having a bit more of a think, and once I've seen the whole ranking, I actually think he's probably more deserving of somewhere in the 6 to 10 area rather than a top 4. So I guess that's just my bad, but it is what it is. It's locked in at this point. So he's the first player that we've got in our top 10. So I think, we'll talk a little bit more about him individually. He was the new addition to the Tyloo roster, which had some troubles during the late 2019, early 2020 period. And I think a lot of my bias towards Slowly and Danking as well is just because of the incredible turnaround that Tyloo had as soon as they picked those two players up. Like, if you look at Slowly's results and his stats, he wasn't that high rated. I think he had like, a 1.03 rating this year? Yeah, 1.03 rating. And a lot of that is largely due to like a couple of really bad tournaments towards the end of 2020. And I would have liked to have had him a little bit higher overall. But I think actually now, having seen the last couple of events that he's played in, I'm pretty happy with where he is in 10th, to be honest. But I did have him in 4th, so I don't know. I think I was just a bit biased towards Slowly, mostly because of those that big turnaround of results, and I just thought Tyloo was fucking sick. But now with the slowdown, I kind of agree with where he's at.
I have to agree. I put him at the 8th position, pretty close, right? I feel like he was the perfect counter to the madness of Danking and Somebody, and I have to agree with you. Like, him coming in, you can't forget, like, the Tyloo spree they went on in the middle of the year was absolutely fucking insane. It wasn't the cleanest of Counter-Strike. It wasn't clean, convincing wins, but they got the fucking win in the end. And Slowly was so instrumental. He was like the Rock. He wasn't going to have these pop-off unplayable games like a Danking or be as impactful as Somebody can be, but he was just this consistent force. He plays, in my opinion, I think Slowly plays the smartest CS in Tyloo alongside maybe Summer, for that matter. And he's actually more impactful than Summer right now. So for me, being a part of Tyloo of 2020, being one of the main reasons Tyloo was able to win so many of these games, why they had that massive streak, top 10 player for me. I put him in 8th, but I think 10th is very fitting for a player of his caliber.
I mean, the only thing I can say is that I had him on my super.
You did. I knew this was going to come up. You had Zhoking and Slowly, and we all laughed at you. We were like, "You're a fucking idiot." But in hindsight, they were actually two pretty good picks.
On his team.
Yeah, his Chinese super team at the start.
Oh, yeah.
But
I think Nick's team would actually body ours, to be honest.
Actually, yeah, they would.
I can't even remember who was on my team.
I had a vision of what 2020 would be like, but then, funnily enough, I completely fucked up my top 20 because I didn't even include Slowly. If you
That's why he's down in 10th, and I put him in 4th.
I mean, dude, I did this list at like 3 o'clock in the morning. I completely forgot about him. To be honest,
it's okay. I completely forgot Sterling as well, Nick. It's fine.
If I was to redo it, yeah, I think Slowly would be in my top 10. He did have a couple of bad events like recently when Tyloo lost.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that's like something is obviously going on in the Tyloo camp. Maybe it's just disagreements or whatever. It happens. And like you said, like, you know, they were winning a lot this year, but if you look closely at the results, it wasn't like they were stomping teams, right? They were losing maps to fucking D13 and shit like that. So it's like, you know, clearly what they have going for them right now is like added firepower, but I don't know if it's the best Tyloo roster we've ever seen. I mean, no, I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's not the best Tyloo roster we've ever seen, but it's kind of like maybe they're looking at it as like it's a bridge for this year, knowing that they're not going to be facing top EU teams, top NA teams anytime soon. They just kind of have to remain at the top of Asia. And yeah, I mean, Slowly and Dan King were brought in to kind of fill that void because there really isn't anyone else right now. I think, again, to my point of why I left out people like Attacker and Summer is because I was looking at it more of an individual level, and you have a lot of up and coming stars in China, like real aim stars, like ridiculous, like their headshot percentage, their, you know, the way they can peek and get you. I see a lot of that just because of like with my own team with Paper X and like watching their scrims and stuff. It's nutty, right? But I obviously can't use that as a basis for anything, but it's just like an observation that I would like to add in there.
All right.
Yep.
You got any 2 cents on Slowly, Pilsky? I noticed he was quite a bit lower in your list than everyone else's.
It's interesting because statistically, he's actually I have him placed below every single other person in the Tyloo team because statistically, he's actually not as strong as the rest of them. And I think that might be a role thing. It's kind of similar to Hatz in a way, where I feel like he doesn't have as much room in his team, and he probably takes a lot of these bitch roles and still gets more out of them than the average player. But if my list is based off tournament performance in terms of your rating and and your results, like team wise, how you placed in a tournament, Slowly only barely made my list simply because Tyloo won so much and he had a couple of top 8 finishes in terms of the stats. But for the most part, he was outrated by most of the VG players, most of the players on Tyloo, and at times even players on struggling teams like D13 or for, you know, Tiger if they performed well, things like that.
Fair enough. But he gets a top 10 placing overall. That's why we, you know, it's like maybe my overreach for 4th and your maybe underreach for whatever you put him equalize out. I think 10 is not bad. You know, he won like the majority of tournaments this year. First big team. I think Slowly's been a very respectable player. So I'm happy to see him in the top 10. Like I said, I think I probably put him a little bit too high, but bummer. Bad luck, Sterling. Anyways, number 9 is Mr. Erkast, our shining star from Mongolia, I feel like. I think he's probably the best Mongolian player of 2020, and he is the highest rated Mongolian player of 2020 as well. He performed really well individually, and this one I felt like I looked a lot more at stats compared to results, even though there was some good results for them. They obviously won Road to Rio, they won Weibo Cup, but I think in a lot of the poorer results for Tiger, he was still like one of the top rated players in every single tournament that I watched. So for me, Erkast is more of like an individual selection as opposed to a team results based kind of selection. And I think he definitely deserves to be a top 10 player this year. I think he's had some pretty good times, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what he's going to be able to do in NG next year.
I feel like it's not just about individuals, right, Jordan? It's also the fact that him coming in, I feel like, was a catalyst for the Mongolian scene to finally break out. Because it could just be a coincidence, but the fact remains that they weren't really doing anything ever since the Mongols came out like a few years ago. We never saw Dobu. Well, Dobu and Cabal in that 5-power lineup, maybe a few decent results here and there, but nothing too special. And then Erkast comes along, gets all these Mongolians around him. Boom, they just win Road to Rio. Could have been a fluke, but doesn't matter. The win is a win, right? There was VG playing there. There was fucking Tyloo playing there as well. And then, sure, they dropped off a little bit, but still consistent top 4, top 3 placements. And like you said, the fact that he was performing even when the team was shitting the bed, I think is very, very... I think it's like super underrated. And if you just look at the results, he's someone it's very easy to kind of miss out on, but we can't. And I think I had him on my 11th position, but top 10, I feel it's very deserved. 9th position is 100% deserved.
I actually had him.
I was just going to ask. Yeah, I had him in 9th too. I was wondering who else had him in top 10.
Just me and you.
I had him in
Okay,
11th.
well,
Yeah, I had him.
Pilsky hates
Oh, sorry.
Erkast,
Go, Nick.
basically.
Go.
I think I was hoping this topic about Mongolia would come up because like this is something that I've been actually kind of working on an article about it. Why I feel the Mongolian scene is booming now, and I think a big part of it is Erkast, right? He came home. It's like, oh, a hero is home. Like, can you imagine if Bntet came back to Indonesia? How many players would be motivated to play CS again? Like the entire Indonesian scene has gone to Valorant right now. There is not a single full Counter-Strike team that is made up of Indonesians. There's basically just Forsaken, excl, and Mindfreak, and we have 2 of those players, and like the rest are all playing Valorant. So I think for sure he kind of awoken this beast in the Mongolian scene. Like you're seeing so many young players now putting in the effort, but also a lot of that has to do with, don't forget, MVP left the scene, Absolute left the scene, and when you look at the East Asia region, for all the events, all the qualifiers in the past, like they were the block to Mongolian teams, right? Like Mongolian teams like
That's
D13,
true.
Mongolian teams like Checkmate have been around for the last 2-3 years. Checkmate is another example, right? Like again, they seem like they're nobodies, but they've been playing CS for God knows how long, like 3-4 years. As long as the Mongols have existed, so has Checkmate to a certain extent. Various roster changes and more of like a mixed team in that sense, but you remove the barrier of Absolute Jupiter, you remove the barrier of MVP PK, and suddenly it's like the tap was open, right? Mongolian scene. So I don't know if it's all Erkast, but obviously he's a big factor. But like, yeah, I mean, him bringing in the knowledge of playing internationally, playing on like better CS, textbook CS from the AU scene, definitely helped that the young guns in Mongolia. So, yeah, top 10 player.
Erkast was 19 for me. He barely scrapes into my list alongside a couple of other Mongolian guys like Dobu and Nine, for example, because the Mongolian guys, as opposed to Invictus, actually won tournaments, actually outplaced some of the top teams in the region. And the only ones that I included in my list were the players who performed very well when they actually did feature at those top 4 tournaments. So Erkast was, I mean, his level of individual performance in Asia is very, very consistent. When he's having a bad game, he's still got like over a 1 rating. And when they're winning, he's usually performing pretty well, even if he's not necessarily like an all-pro or like a traditional star player or something like that. So yeah, he barely scrapes into mine just because he has a good level of performance and because he actually won tournaments similar to Dobu, similar to Nine. If you go look at the top 8 players in tournaments where Tiger did well, like Wakebo Cup, like that Road to Rio RMR event rather that they won, and other events that they've attended and done well in, such as like the Perfect World events, you'll see a lot of the same Mongolian players also placing in the top 8 alongside the Vici and Tyloo players.
Indeed. So I still think it's a deserving spot. I think he's had a pretty good year, and I'm hopeful that we're going to see as good or even a better year. To be honest, he's got a very good team, potentially, depending on who you ask, in NG Esports. So that'll be something that we'll talk about, I'm sure, a lot in 2021. Anyway, let's move on to player number 8, who is somebody, and he's actually equal points with Erkast. But the reason he got the tiebreaker win was because of Mr. Bleh, who put him up in 7th place. So he got a higher ranking from one of us than Erkast did, even though he got the same amount of points. So I think, look, I don't think it's unreasonable to have somebody in the top 10 as well, for much the same reasons as I've spoken about for Slowly, Summer, Auman, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I think you have to have all of these Tyloo guys in just because of the dominance, really, that they had this year.
Yeah, the reason I had him there was, again, like if you just look at overall ratings, Attacker's actually higher rated than somebody. Somebody's just the impact player, right? He was looking a little slow when we saw the rise of Tyloo again this year. It was slowly and tanking primarily, and then Attacker having some big games. But then somebody gradually towards the latter half of the year just been looking better and better. And again, you can't take it away from Tyloo. They won more events in Asia than any other team. They won more tier one events in Asia than any other team, and somebody has 100% been quite impactful. It's not like overall like that great, primarily because he had a very quiet year at the beginning. And obviously they were playing in EU, they're playing Pro League, but they were struggling quite a bit with that old team they had with Freeman and whatnot. But I feel like overall, somebody has had so much of impact. He had like what I think three events ever since he came back from to China, where he had a negative rating. Apart from that, he has been just sheer consistency personified. And especially when it comes to some of the bigger events, like when it comes to the RMR events, he was fantastic. The first RMR event, especially, I think, was the highest rated player or the second highest rated player for Tai Lu. So for me, it was a no-brainer. He had to come in the top 10. 7th, 8th, it's debatable, but somewhere around there.
He was in everyone's list, by the way. Both Erkast and somebody were in everyone's top 20. So that's why, yeah, he just got that little bit of an extra bump from your high placing of him. I think I had him in 9th at that point. So, pretty similar. Overall, I don't really think there's an argument against somebody to be in the top 20 at least. But even the top 10. Exactly, that's the joke. I actually have written down on my notes, by the way, otherwise known as who. Like, obviously the most, beat the dead horse joke that you could make on a cast. Pilski. Not naming any names.
The who?
Mac does it more than me.
Does he?
Yeah, he definitely does. I had somebody at 14th. Actually, I think compared to the last 3 years, I think somebody's kind of shit now, to be honest. And he still is consistently getting a 1.15 rating or something like that in a lot of these tournaments, which pretty much says it all, right? Like, that's how fucking good this guy is. I think he's very restrained on this version of Tai Lu. I've seen him throw a few grenades, actually, which is interesting. And he doesn't recklessly push around everywhere. He's doing a lot of secondary AWPing. I genuinely think that either he's chosen to take a back seat in Tai Lu and not take up as much space as he did before, and not necessarily just try to outright win the game for his squad, and let the other guys have a little bit more room, because I really think he's a shadow of his former self. And I've cast him a lot the last couple of years, and I've cast him a lot this year, and he plays completely differently to how he used to play. And I don't think of him as like the candidate for best player in Asia. Like, I used to think somebody, best fucking player in Asia, 1.3 rating every event, fucking shits on everyone, easy as fuck. Goes international, has limited success because of his high variance playstyle. But this year really hasn't been up to the scratch that he was a couple of years ago, in my opinion. But he's still fucking winning everything, and he's still pulling insane ratings anyway.
I feel like somebody this year has been that, like, you have this wild child, like, rock star dude is like fucking doing drugs and being a party guy while being in like a massive rock and roll band. And you're like, when is he gonna calm down and just play music properly? Like, he's such a fantastic guitarist, just throwing his shitting his life away doing drugs. And then he suddenly has a kid, and he's got to take care of the kids, and now he's like kind of matures up as a musician, as a person. That's somebody. The kids are danking and slowly coming in. It's like, I can't keep doing this because it's going to affect them. And I agree with Pilski. He has played a completely different style of Counter-Strike this year, but ironically, I feel that's better. I love that. I love that from somebody this time around. Even though he doesn't have those crazy games where you're like, what the fuck is he doing? It's like 9,000 IQ plays. He's not doing that anymore. But I think it's for the betterment of the team overall. So yeah, that's kind of like my counter here.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And I think I remember you saying something to me once, Bleh. I don't remember if it was in person or over Discord or something, but you said somebody's the type of player that plays to the level that he's playing at. Like, if he was to go and play, Na'Vi and Astralis today, I'm not saying that they would win by any means, but he would be able to like step up in those moments against those teams. But like right now, he just doesn't have to. And he has, like you said, younger players like Slowly and Danking, and he's probably taking a back seat. He is also, he's getting older every year. No surprises. So I don't think he's at his peak form that he used to be, like maybe 2 years ago. But who knows what can happen next year, right? And I think, generally speaking, that you can't have a top 20 list without including him for the most part.
I would agree with that, to be honest, Nick. I think going overseas might have some contribution to that at the start of this year. I think maybe management might have some contribution to that, but that's just speculation. But also just the fact that he basically has just completely changed his game for the most part when Tyler was winning. But actually, when they lost, and we just saw them in the last tournament against Tiger, and Tyler wasn't performing as well, slowly was having a shocker of a tournament. You can ask, wait, Jordan, you were there the whole time. You were casting all the games, right?
Of what?
Of Tyler in that last tournament we did, DreamHack, right? Yeah. Did you notice, like, when Slowly's not playing well and Tyler's not winning, somebody was right back on his bullshit?
Yes.
Like, he was doing some of that shit again, and he wasn't doing that before when they were winning. So I'm kind of wondering.
I think it's an important point about the role change for somebody, because you can't have Danking and somebody, or Peak somebody, in the same team. You know, you can't have both of those players doing what they like to do. So someone has to give a bit of ground. So I think it's been
3v5 every round, bro.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
It would honestly break me if we saw like Danking and Prime somebody playing their style of CS at the same time. It would actually fucking break me. So thank God for somebody maturing as a player. God bless somebody.
All right, let's talk about number 7, which is Sico, who just snuck in by 1 point over somebody. He's had a really good year alongside, obviously, the rest of Renegades. Now, everyone knows he's the AWPer for that team. Had a 1.17 rating. They won like 11 tournaments in a row domestically. And what's even more impressive, and I didn't even really realize this until I started to go back and have a bit of a look through some of the stats, is he's only had one negative event this year, and that was Katowice, where they went overseas and played against international teams. So he's had a really, really solid year. So I think definitely deserving of a top 10 spot for Sico this year.
Yeah. I guess that's the only input I have here. Like,
I could take it, yeah. Look, to be honest, I don't think Sico's anywhere close to as individually good as he was when he was playing on Order and like fucking topping the charts and things like that. But it's kind of like, it almost doesn't matter about his form because his play style is so good and consistent in Renegades. He throws a lot of supportive utility. I always see him setting up the other players. I always see him like flashing Dexter into top mid and things like that, and those two playing off of each other. He's always just taking lines that make sense. He's definitely not as aggressive as he used to be, but he's just like a pillar of consistency. And I feel like he doesn't even need to necessarily play that well, and Renegade still wins because of how much extra stuff he does on top of the primary AWPer role that he performs. Like, I feel like other AWPers, they're so focused and obsessed on, making sure they get kills and get the AWP and things like that. I feel like Sico he does so much more than just AWPing and looking for picks and things like that. It's the utility. It's how he holds angles for his teammates. I'm sure his communication is very good because he's setting other people up. He's got a fair bit of experience and he's a bit of an older head now. So I feel like there's almost more in the tank for Sico, which is insane because he's like one of the top rated players in the region. If he could hit like another level of individual form or maybe try to go into a more aggressive kind of play style, but I don't think it even matters. I think he does everything and more that Renegades could want. And I think he's a very, very good player, but not in the exciting sense of like, holy shit, Alistair's fucking running around and flicking everybody and just doing some insane shit, He just plays good Counter-Strike.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that assessment. Like, he's not a showy player. He's not trying, and that's not what he needs to be, right? Like, Renegades is the best team in AU right now because they're playing proper Counter-Strike. It's not, and Sico himself he's an impactful player, basically, is what you're saying. And I think I agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing I can really add to what these guys have mentioned.
Seems like we're all in agreement, which is pretty good.
I don't watch enough AU CS to really.
I put him in my top 5 actually. That's how good I rate the guy.
Yeah, I was actually the person that had him lowest. I even had him in 15th place, to be honest. But the rest of you guys have carried him, so you guys can take his thanks. I'll take the hate. Obviously, it's hard to put anyone above Malta, so someone had to take the bullet. Unfortunately for me, that was Sico. Anyway, it's funny, by the way, speaking of Malta, because I can see he's in Twitch chat here, that we're talking about the AWP buff for the rankings here, because you are going to start to see a few AWPers in the top list here. And we've got another one coming up in 6th place now. I know people were really keen to have Alistair in the top 5. He didn't quite get there this time. Top 6, though, for Alistair, and he's the only order player that is going to be in the rankings. I think he did a phenomenal job as an individual this year. I mean, despite the fact that the results haven't quite been there for order in terms of winning any tournaments, he's been, as an individual, a very, very shining beacon for the order roster. So he's had some good results with his teammates as well. You know, like Ricky and Ustilo have been good lately as well. But I think Alistair, over a consistent basis over the course of 2020, has been the best player in order. And in my mind, he's probably been one of the better players in ANZ outside of Renegades. I would almost go so far as to say I think he's the best player in ANZ outside of the Renegades roster at the moment.
Hard agree.
But I'd have to have a bit more of a think about that. That's obviously just something I've thrown out there right now. So yeah, give us your thoughts on Alistair right now.
I actually thought about this for a bit. He's my top 10. I put him in 9th position. And I have to agree with you. Like, even though the results, well, basically Renegades being the gatekeepers, right? But imagine a world where this guy was playing for Renegades. I'm not going to get into the entire discussion of who he's going to replace or whatever, but imagine a world where he's playing for Renegades, or if Renegades didn't exist, right? This guy would just be fucking shitting on everyone's mouths. He fucking amazing player, individually fantastic, a good looking lad as well, so it gets plus 10 points from me for that. And yeah, overall, I feel like just his like, even from an eye test, even having casted just a few tournaments so far for ANZ teams, just based off an eye test, the guy's at a different league compared to a lot of the players he's playing against in the region. Where, yeah, I had to put him even over, the likes of certain players in Asia who have actual results, who have won tournaments. I just feel like it's just unfortunate that Renegades exists for him. Apart from that, he's an absolute beast. And 6th position, yeah, deserved. I put him in my 9th, but I wasn't going to be chuffed if he, I wasn't rather going to be pissed off if he was a little bit higher. So yeah, deserved.
Yeah.
You go, Nick. You go.
Okay. I also put him in my top 5. It was mainly, like, to be honest, like I said, I didn't really watch that much AU CS this year. I only watched like the grand finals of big events, and I remember just the one performance that I did happen to see him in was the one where Order beat Renegades in that series. It was 2-1 or something at DreamHack, the recent DreamHack, and I was watching Alistair and I was like, damn, he's pretty nutty. And maybe that was like a one-off performance, but then when I looked at the HLTV stats and looked at his performance overall throughout the year, he's been consistently good. So that's kind of like, for me there, it was biased more on his stats rather than what I actually observed. But, stats don't lie. They have some value. And playing in the AU scene, for me, it's like you're a good player if you're sure the stats are padded because it's the same top 4 teams all the time, beating all the other teams. But yeah, if you're up there with on par with Renegades players who are winning everything, then that says a lot, right? And that was my main reason for putting him in top 5.
Yeah, I've been a big Alistair fanboy for like the longest time. I think I had him at number 7. I didn't put him in my top 5. He didn't unfortunately win anything. That's a big reason for that. And I think Renegades is kind of the reason why he might not take a top 5 spot on some people's lists. At the end of the day, both his individual performance suffers when he plays Renegades. He doesn't play up to the same level as when he plays against some other teams that he can punish their mistakes and he can get away with a little bit more, I think, than he can against Renegades. I think Alistair, he might be a tad inconsistent from time to time. Like sometimes he will go missing in a series and that can be really, really detrimental for order. But I'd say 99% of the time he is, very, very good player, a top player in Australia, a really fucking good AWPer. And he's probably my favorite player to watch in Australia by far when he's playing well. He has such an entertaining play style. He hits fucking insane shots. He has such fluid movement and such a good intuitive like feel and sense for the game to where like you could just see he's just playing so effortlessly. And some people just more talented. He's just fucking genetically talented, like built for CS, man.
So I'll just point out as well, he was the highest rated player in DreamHack Spring and the Asia Minor closed qualifier. So he had a couple of tournaments where he really just outperformed even everyone in ANZ, which was another sort of tick in my book. Even despite being in a team that may not have necessarily won those tournaments, I think is kind of a big deal as well. So congratulations to Alistair on not quite making the top 5. You were close. In top 5 is Danking, and I don't think that should come as too much of a surprise. He has been a pretty dynamic player in every sense of the word for the Tyloo roster. Again, factoring in my equations was the fact that when he came into this roster, it really seemed to revitalize Tyloo. He's, I think, the highest rated individual in the Tyloo roster of late. He was the highest rated player at DreamHack Spring and in the Asia Minor qualifier. So, hey, actually, that goes hand in hand with Alistair, right? But just on the Asian side of things. You know, and he's just been a very, very solid player across the board. 1.19 rating. He does sometimes do some weird things, but by and large, I feel like he makes it work more often than not. And he was kind of that bit of extra firepower that the Tyloo roster maybe needed. And finally, a Chinese AWPer, by the way. A Chinese AWPer that can actually make it in a top-tier team and genuinely deserve to be there as an AWPer. You know, like, you got Summer, you had him playing AWP for a while, but, like, he was there because he was Summer, not because he was a great AWPer. But I think this is a big asset to Tyloo, having Danking in the roster. So I definitely think he deserves a top 5 this year.
He's fucking mental is what he is. Like, fucking pisses me off so much, but you can't deny it, right? Highest rated player for Tyloo. Past 3 months, 1.19 rating. Past 6 months, 1.18 rating. All across 2020, 1.19. And the second highest is, I think it is, I think it's somebody or is slowly at 1.10. So his impact cannot be stressed, right? Ever since he's come on in, he's been fantastic. All the big events have won so far. He has been the highest rated player. At times, almost unplayable. The way he just toys with every single team in Asia is ridiculous. Only teams who are able to counter him and also punish him for his mistakes is, of course, Vici Gaming, able to counter him. But even then, right? Even then, he's still performing at a very, very high level. It's just as not able to basically solo carry Tyloo. The only reason I have him a little bit lower here, I would have actually placed him higher up. I think I have him 6th in my ranking. I would have maybe even had him like in a top 4, even, you know, because you got to consider, again, many people forget that Tyloo won more events than anyone else in Asia, right? The thing is, he still makes too many mistakes, which I don't want to see, which you won't see certain players in the top 5 ever make, which is something I really hope he does fix, because if he does it, I have no doubt at all that he could potentially be one of the all-time greats of Asian CSGO in the future, right? So hopefully he matures a little bit, but you still cannot ever discount the impact he's had for Tyloo.
Yeah, I think Danking is like this player who I've never played against him, but I get the sense that, I mean, maybe Nick would know from some of his boys, but I get the sense that Danking is like a player that you're actually fucking scared of. Like, he's not just going to get like a pick on you. He's going to kill your whole fucking team. Like, he doesn't stop. He never slows down. There's no voice in his head that's like, oh, maybe you shouldn't peek that or something like that. And it doesn't exist. You know, some people have a conscience. Like Danking, I feel like he's the kind of person that probably doesn't. Like, he just doesn't have anything else other than he wants to go fucking kill you, and that's it. And he's been what Tyloo's needed for ages, honestly. Like, Tyloo for such a long time did not have a fucking primary AWPer. And I was like, for so many years, I was like, why can't Savage just play on Tyloo? Or why can't, you know, this guy play on Tyloo? And it never happened. And they always just had second-rate AWPers or people who kind of just like fulfilling the AWP role. I'm so glad they finally have Danking. And I'm very intrigued to see what's going to happen when he goes overseas, because I feel like he's either going to like shock the international CS scene with how fucking good he is and have like an insane performance, or he's going to shit the bed. And I don't think it's going to be anything in between.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you remember this, Bleh, when we had the conversation with Tyloo's manager, Jack, last year in Shanghai, and we were like, why Danking? You know, he's an asshole. Like, we heard, you know, let's not talk about his personal issues, but why put up with him? And Jack just said, because he's fucking good, you know?
Yeah, I remember that.
And when you have conversations with other Chinese players and even with my own players, like, yeah, he's pretty fucking good. Like, and to your point, Pili, I mean, from the observations of my players, I don't think it's no one's scared of him, but he's just annoying to play against, right? It's always like, I remember Davai's be like, fucking wife beater Chinese, you know, like whenever he gets killed by Dan King, and it's just like, yeah.
Maybe that's that's like the tilt factor. That's even an extra tick in his book as far as where he is at as a player. You know, not to speak to his character or anything, but like if that tilts you as much as it does, then
no. But that's the thing with him. I don't think he's a dumb player by any means, right? He's a really really smart player. Except the fact that he is so fucking confident that he will personally he will beat, like there'll be a little voice inside of him is going to be like, hey, don't peek that danking. You know better than this, and he's going to shut the fuck up. I'm going to peek that shit. And then he dies, and then it breaks my mind. But one day, I hope Danking grows up and he can be a number one player. He can be a Bntet of China, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. All right, well, on from Danking, then we need to unveil our top 4 player, which is Kaze. And I would make the argument that I think Kaze is still the number 1 AWPer in Asia. Danking is getting there. He's getting there.
Agreed.
But there's a bit too much random shit going on for Danking at the moment. I reckon in 2021 he probably does overtake Kaze, but I definitely think Kaze deserves a top 4. I almost want to put him top 3, but I don't think you can make the argument that he's a top 3 when you do see there are other, the guys that are in top 3. I don't think you can really make much of an argument that they don't deserve to be there. But Kaze's a phenomenal player. He's been awesome. He's the highest rated player from anywhere in Asia that isn't China. The fact that he's the only Malaysian on this roster as well, on this top 20, I think is just as impressive. The fact that he's playing in Vichy and he's speaking Chinese and he's from, Malaysia. It's all just extra sort of stuff that he has to deal with. He was the highest rated player in ESL Pro League Season 12, DreamHack Summer and PAL Summer. And he had a 1.22 rating this year, so very, very consistent across the board. He only had a couple of games where he sort of let the ball drop during the middle of the year, but obviously that's turned around lately, and Vichy have kind of rocketed back up to number 1. So Kaze definitely deserved top 5 in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, he's been at like, top 20. We'll talk about someone like somebody, right? Who, if you're making this list, you can't ignore somebody. Kaze is one of those players too. And I think he's just consistently gotten better over the years, to be honest. Like, there was one point I felt, probably like 2018, I think, when he first joined Vichy, I understood why they picked him up, but I was like, at that point in time, there are better AWPers, but he's kind of grown into this role. And he's one of those players like similar to like Sico that we were talking about. He's not flashy. It's not about his like amazing plays and he's like doing things that change the course of the game on the surface. But then when you look back and you realize that, let's say train B site, for example, he's able to anchor that site by himself, right? Terrorists come in, rush, all the flashbangs, all the smokes, and all the utility in the world, but he'll get at least 2 kills. And his job is done. And he does that consistently time and time and again. And even when Vichy was losing to Tyloo, those like that, what was it, like 13 series in a row or something, where it was like so disheartening for Vichy, but like Kaze was the guy that was sort of carrying the torch for Vichy throughout all of that. So he's definitely, and to your point, I would add about this language barrier, he's the only player that's playing at home in Malaysia. The rest of them are all in China, right? So he's got potential connection issues to the Hong Kong server and all of that online stuff that we all hate, but he's managed to like pull through all of that. So it's, I'm excited to see what happens next year with this Vichy roster, even if they do make changes. I don't think they're going to change Kaze, but yeah, he's having a good year for sure.
Got to say about Kaze is like he's the only player apart from Bntet who I've said could actually move internationally and he would still do good, right? That's how much how good of a player he is. And I guess Nick pretty much covered it right there. He is their second highest rated player. The best AWP player in Asia by far. I feel like Danking's, like you said earlier, Danking's getting there, but he's not what Kaze is. Kaze is a game winner. He is a tournament winner. And I feel like he was absolutely instrumental alongside Jamyoung and, of course, Zhoking and Auman having big moments for Vichy to be where they are this year, right? They had a fantastic start to the year and a great end to the year. And Kaze was one of the 2 main elements in them getting that. So I put him in the 4th position as well. So I feel like I want to put him higher as well, Jordan. It's just that, like you said, like if you look at other top 3 players, it's kind of evident that he had to be the fourth in the 4th spot.
Yeah, indeed. Pilski, I know he wasn't in your 4th spot. He was actually a little bit higher. So you are the one sort of outlier amongst ourselves. You know, myself, Bleh, and Nick had the same top 3 in different orders, but you were the only one that had Kaze actually up in your top 3, interestingly enough. So you obviously rate him quite highly, and I don't necessarily disagree, but I do think that the other 3, in my mind, just outperformed him a little bit this year. But give us your thoughts.
So if you go look at the stats, Kaze is always in the top 8 of performers in the tournament, usually in the top 4 for the most part. Pretty consistently holds like a 1.2 rating no matter what. He's such a fucking solid player, man. Like, it's like him and Danking are like polar opposites. You know, Danking, you watch him do shit and he's like, you know, peaking stuff. He's, you know, going for high variance plays. When you watch Kaze makes a mistake and you're like, whoa, that was weird. Like, what the fuck? Like, you remember it, you know, that it's like in every given situation, exactly like Nick was saying, you know, like a B-side anchor on train or something like that. You have to remember, Danking's given freedom to be a wild card to do whatever he wants. Kaze operates within a system, like a very finely tuned system. He always operates well within his environment. He makes very little mistakes. Whether there's a strat going on around him and he's part of an execute, he can pick up a rifle. He can run in an entry like we've seen on Mirage. He can clutch and play post plants. He can AWP on T and CT side. He's so dynamic. He can literally do everything. He can hold angles, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I think he's a top player just based off his consistency of ratings over the whole year, the fact that he won a couple of tournaments, and if he didn't win the tournament, he was usually coming second. So,
yeah, a very, very solid player. Now, we are in the top 3, so I want to build a little bit of the suspense here. You know, obviously this doesn't apply for the YouTube viewers, but for those of you who are in Twitch chat, I know there's quite a few and you're all talking, so it's great to have you here. Really appreciate you tuning in. Like and subscribe. Who do you think's the 3rd place player? I can see a few people are getting a bit of an idea as to who the top 3 might be, but the order of the top 3 might be a little bit more so up for debate. So I'll leave it here for a moment until we start to see people typing in chat who they think is going to be the 3rd player. By the way, who do you guys think is 3rd place? While we're waiting. Just say a name. Just say a name. You don't have to like justify or anything. We'll talk about that.
I'm gonna go with Ince.
Okay, Ince in 3rd.
I'm gonna go Dexter.
3rd, I'm gonna go, Dexter for 3rd.
Okay.
People
are saying Ruffleco. I've got to say, bad news, Ruffleco. You didn't make the list. Sorry, mate. You didn't get, and no one actually voted for Ruffleco. He wasn't in anyone's top 20. Maybe next year. In's in 3rd. I know, like, how could an eco-fragger be 3rd place? All right. You guys are so far off. No one got it right. It was Jamyoung. But
okay.
Only by a smidge. 72 points. You know, he was in my top 3. He was in Bleh's top 3. He was in Nick's top 3. And Pilski, he was in your top 5. So definitely agreement across the board that he was a very, very solid player this year. His Vichi's most recent pickup, he has been super, super impressive, coming from almost nothing. You know, we never even heard about him in 2019.
He's a pugger.
Yeah, and now he's in the best team in Asia. He's one of, if not maybe the best player on that team. He had a 1.23 rating this year. He hasn't had a single negative event at all in 2020. And he was the highest rated player at Palfall, you know, and Road to Rio. Like, he's been having some pretty insane tournaments. ESL 1 Cologne, he was also the top rated player there. So, you know, he was insane this year, I thought, Jamyoung. And as far as I'm concerned, like, Jamyoung, Kaze, probably fairly interchangeable in terms of like who's better or like who's got more impact or where you want to sit them in your top 20. But I'm definitely on board with Jamyoung in the top 3. In fact, I think I had him in 2nd place, personally speaking. But top 3 definitely in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, let this be on record. Like, you guys said he's a pugger. Like, I asked Advent last year, how did you find Jamyoung? He's like, I opened up 5e Play, which is like the Faceit of China, and I looked at the leaderboard and I picked the top guy. It's Jamyoung. That was it. There was no secret sauce or methodology. He just
no scouting, nothing.
Yeah, he's just like, oh, top player, let's trial him.
I was imagining like he was Adam was playing like a pug, and then he sees his kid, and he's like fucking shitting on him. He's like, oh, who is this player? Like, I wanted to believe in something more fairy tale like, but
it started with like him looking at the leaderboard, and then obviously I guess he invited him for a trial or whatever, and then started playing, and then they realized, yeah, this guy's got something, right? And I think it's shown. Like last year when he came on board, we were all like, who's this Jamyoung? Like ironic his name is Young, but like he was 18 at that time, and he had not played for any team, nothing. Like, so really, it's a question. He obviously has the raw skill. He has the talent. It's about him fitting into the system, understanding professionalism, understanding being on a team, communication, all of that. And I think he's going to have a big 2021 for sure.
Hopefully.
Yeah, well, it depends on the situation, right? But
I didn't have him in my top 3. I had him at 5th. Mostly because Vici didn't win a whole lot of tournaments this year. But I did have Kaze a little higher rated. In terms of like the individual rating, I felt like Jamyoung was reasonably up there in terms of that, but he did fluctuate a little bit more in terms of performance than Kaze did. I think, to be honest, maybe I could have swapped him out, and it's very, very close once you get to this point in terms of the rankings, but I do think that Jamyoung is probably the best player in China, and I think he has the most potential out of anyone in China, to be honest. Like, if I can think of somebody who could play on a team like, I mean, I know he's Chinese. I don't know if he speaks English or whatever, but if I could chuck someone on like an actual EU team, and I reckon they could actually understand the level of EU Counter-Strike and actually like function within the team and perform, I actually think Jamyoung would like fit on a team like that. Like, I reckon you could chuck like Jamyoung into like an Astralis system or something like that, and he would actually know what's going on and perform. Like, he's got a fucking head on his shoulders, man.
Yeah. I did put Jamyoung in the second spot for me, but I can also understand why he would be in the third spot, right? Like you said, he hasn't won too many events compared to the top 2. Also, no international events for Jamyoung, so it's really hard to like, know how he would really play. So actually, in hindsight, now looking at it, the third placing I think is very fitting. He is, in my eyes, the best player right now in Asia. It's very interchangeable between Kaze and Jamyoung, but I think like Jamyoung, he's just able to do so many more roles, right? Because he's just a pure rifler. And also the fact that he came out of nowhere just from a pugger to playing such smart Counter-Strike, very Robs-esque, if you ask me. I know I'm giving him a lot of high praise here by comparing to Robs, but you know what I mean. And I feel like, yeah, third position is very, very fitting overall. I feel like the little bit of struggles they had in the middle against Tai Lu and the lack of international events kind of hurts him. And again, it's not his fault, but yeah, hope to see him continue this form next year, and maybe, a few international events, maybe can surprise all of us.
Indeed, indeed. Well, that's the top players from Asia. There's a little hint for who's number 2 and 1, because there are no more Asian players on the list remaining. So it's just ANZ players, and I don't think that it should be a huge surprise as to who those 2 are. They've both had very, very good years. And in second place this year, we have Dexter, 74 points. So he was just a little bit above Jamyoung. I think largely thanks to the placing that Bleh gave him. You had him as your number 1 player this year.
I think we should just like show both the first and second, because I feel like it's kind of obvious right now.
Okay, fine.
Right? And
First place is
It will also be easier to compare the 2 and discuss why we have them like first and second place.
Sure. I do want to touch on Dexter first, though. We'll obviously talk about ins after Bleh stops breaking his broom. I think they kind of go hand in hand, right? You can have like pretty much everything I'm going to say about Dexter, I'm going to say about ins anyway. We all had him in our top 4. He was the IGL, obviously, of Renegades, the team that won like 10 or 11 tournaments in a row domestically. He had a 1.24 rating. He only had 1 negative event this year, which was Katowice, the international tournament. And even there, he had a 0.97 rating, which is not too bad against the level of competition that is at that tournament. And he was the highest rated player in PAL Fall, ESL ANZ Champs, Season 11, and Road to Rio. So, phenomenal player. And I almost want to say he was robbed for first, but I didn't actually think he was the best player this year. So I had him in, what did I have him in? I had him in third, actually. Yeah, I had him in third. So I had Jamyoung second, ins first. But I don't think anyone's going to necessarily disagree that he deserves at least a top 3 placing this year.
Oh, for sure. I think like top two, top three is without a doubt for Ins. I had Dexter in first place, right? And I had Ins in the third place, but Jamyoung in the second. Now, in hindsight, it kind of makes sense. Jamyoung should have been a little lower because he hasn't had international exposure, nor has he won as many events as Ins and Dexter have. For me, why I put Dexter number one was going back all the way to the beginning of the year was DreamHack Anaheim, right? Renegades, they placed second to reach the finals. I think they lost to Big. No, not too big. Was it too big? I forget. Whatever it was,
Yeah,
they beat.
I think it was
beat,
Leipzig, right? But they came second to Big.
No, was it Leipzig or Anaheim? I'm trying to just remember.
I think it was Leipzig.
It was Leipzig. You're right. They lost to Big. They beat Heroic. They beat Mad Lions. Now this is before the rise of Heroic and Mad Lions or whatever. But hey, you know what? An Aussie team, a team from our region, going there and just smashing all these EU guys. Fantastic stuff. And guess who was the highest rated player? It was Dexter. By far, he was the fucking carry for the team while being the IGL, playing some fantastic Counter-Strike. And then they played Katowice, where they kind of struggled. I won't lie there. But again, both Ins and Dexter had equal ratings overall. The reason I'm giving Dexter a little bit of why I'm still batting for him, saying him that he's a number one, is firstly, he's the IGL. It's a hard carry IGL. And when it came to their only international event they had this year, where they had actual really solid competition. No, I mean, nothing against the other Aussie teams they're playing against, but let's be fucking real. Heroic, Mad Lions, these guys are a different league altogether, right? Even early this year, even before they had their rise, Dexter was a fucking hard carry. And it's just unfortunate that Renegades didn't have an opportunity to really play more international events, but I feel like Dexter would have been able to show more. And for Ins, look, he's doing his fucking job. He's just shitting on people who are just worse than he is. He's just a better player, right? But how would he have fared against better teams, against more structured teams and better players overall? I don't know. It's a question mark for me right now. Like, he would still not be a bad player, don't get me wrong, but can he get those 1.34 ratings or 1.28 ratings he's getting in these Oceanic tournaments? I don't know. Can Dexter do it? Yes, he can. We've seen him do that. And for me, yeah, Dexter will always remain the number one for me this year.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I can't really argue with any of those points. And also, I had this exact 1, 2, 3 on my list, so I feel, interchangeably, Dexter and Ins for 1 and 2. You can argue both equally, but Ins for me took or if we're talking about Dexter took the spot because again, I did look at stats as part of my parameter, and Ins had the better stats overall. So it's like when you look at Dexter as an entire package, I would say he's the better player, right? Because again, like what Bleh was alluding to is that we saw him. This is the top 20 of 2020, and we did see him perform this year against tier 1 teams, even though it was at the beginning of the year. But again, that's LAN, and that's, it's very telling about someone's ability when they're playing on LAN, obviously. And he is the IGL, and he had to take that role, transition. So he's very deserving of that spot.
1.18 when they have players like Sirson, Xantares, S-Attack, A-Core, Bobski, fucking taps it. I mean, that's fucking impressive, man.
Exactly.
Dexter was 1.24 rating this year, by the way. I don't know if we mentioned that. Pilski, do you have anything to touch on for Dexter? Because after that, I want to talk about Ins.
Yeah, I feel like I'll be repeating myself, but I feel like he is probably the most appropriate player to actually join a top 10 team in this whole region. So that pretty much speaks for itself. And I'm sure that there would have been like some teams looking at picking him up or potentially like bringing him in and stuff like that. He's a fucking insane player. He actually plays proper Counter-Strike. He understands CS to a level that I probably never will be able to actually like perceive myself. And I think in general, he is more valuable to a team maybe than Ins because he is an in-game leader. He does a lot of prep work and things like that. And he is also a bit of a beast in the server as well.
I don't disagree. I would say I think if I had to build a team, Dexter would be my first choice. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I think he's been the best player in 2020. And to your point, Bleh, again, don't disagree with what you're saying about Dexter performing internationally. But if we're ranking 2020, we can only look really at 2020. And there is only one or two international results. And the large majority of performances that we saw from these players was in the domestic region, which is where Ins kind of farmed. So in my mind, Ins is absolutely the best player of the year. He was the highest rated player. you know, I find this funny, right? Because we've been going through and everyone's had like 1 or 2 events, and I thought that's pretty good. Let me just read to you for ins. Highest rated player at DreamHack Winter, IEM Beijing, ESL Pro League Season 12, ESL 1 Cologne, DreamHack Summer, and the IEM Katowice qualifier. So of the 10 tournaments that they played in this year domestically, he was like the highest rated player in like 5 or 6. So he's like just destroying everyone in ANZ. He was the highest rated individual, 1.27, compared to his normal 1.19. So I think this move into Renegades has obviously been fantastic for him. He also only had that one negative event this year, which was Katowice, 0.97. He's also won 10 or 11 tournaments in a row in ANZ, so can't really argue against that. And the main takeaway is that 3 out of 4 of us put him as our number 1 player. He only missed out on 2 points that he could have potentially got. You know, you could have got a maximum of 80 points in this ranking, and Bleh cucked him. So I don't think that there's much of an argument against Ins personally. I
mean, just look at his ratings, right? Like, okay, the last 8 events he's done, I'm just taking a look here. And these are like DreamHack events, like Masters. We have the Perfect World events, like the RMR events, and then you have ESL events, right? They're like Pro League and stuff like that. 1.36, 1.46, 1.39, 1.29, 1.39, another 1.38. The guy's just fucking farming.
Yeah,
it's
like you can't argue against the stats, really.
You can't argue against the stats. Holy shit.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, if Ins is in the chat, did he ever get his MVP award money from the OMEN HP
I think
last
he did.
year?
Yeah, he did. I don't know if he's in chat,
Uh,
but he did. I'm pretty sure he said that on Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah, because I just suddenly remembered that he was the MVP of that event, and that was like the last sort of Asian event that we saw him in, right? So that's like the only comparison we have on him against like the top Asian teams. Of course, there was no Tailu Avicii in that event, but you know, like they won that event, and he was the MVP. So I think that was like maybe a 1% factor for me on keeping him as like the top 1. But then to the point that you were saying earlier, like he joined Greyhound, and then they went to play. Just looking at the stuff from last year, they played against like Astralis in a best of 1, Mouse Sports in a BO3, and this is like he was still new on the team, right? He hadn't really come to his own yet. But then this year he's been popping off like, you know, in the AU scene. So I'm excited to see how Renegades are next year. Hopefully, you know, this pandemic settles down and we can see some sort of international lands.
I think it pretty much speaks for itself that there was one event that we commentated, Jordan, I don't know if you remember, where I think Ins 30 bombed almost every map. Every map. And we were keeping track of it. And I was like, he did it again. And I think there was maybe one map where he didn't 30 bomb, but out of like the 8 to 10 maps they played that event, he 30 bombed every map. Like, that's fucking retarded. Like, you just you can't even. I don't even get it.
Like, actually looking at the stats right now, I'm starting to even doubt my Dexter number 1 pick, because this is actually ludicrous. It's like Bntet levels of fucking hard carry, right? I still stand by, like, you know, if you had to pick one player in the entirety of Asia and ANZ to be picked up by, like how Pilsky mentioned, like a top 10, top 15 team in Europe, maybe right now, who would it be? Would it be into Dexter? I'd still go with Dexter, right?
I would probably go with Dexter.
I would probably go with Dexter as well.
Yeah, and for me, that is like why I like this. I like the fact that we're actually like discussing this, right? It's not just like clean cut Ins being the number 1 player. He is by the numbers, because it is absolutely retarded, as Pilsky so beautifully put it. It is so stupid how fucking massive he's been popping off against these teams. But then again, you know, when you think about it more in depth, Dexter also definitely deserves it. I like it. I like the way it's kind of like mixed up. It's, again, you know, the sort of ranking, like, Jordan, you were looking for, right? Where it's still going to be kind of scuffy. You don't know who is the real number 1. Yeah, this is fun. Good ranking overall. I thought it was going to be more fucked up than it kind of played out.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think the whole point of this wasn't necessarily to be like, this is the definitive ranking. He is the number 1 player. Although, I mean, I think we know everything there is to know about Counter-Strike, so maybe it is. But more so to just generate a bit of discussion, and hopefully some people will have a bit of a discussion about this and maybe think about their own rankings and that kind of thing. I will say I think there's a lot of players that probably deserve to be in this top 20 that might have missed out. Thinking on some of the other options that we had, I think 18, 19, 20 definitely could have swapped around with a few different options. Before we talk about that, though, I do want to give a quick shout out. In the Twitch chat, Mr. Greyhound, and this is for the YouTube viewers as well, he is selling Inns underwear signed by Inns for $50 per piece. So
Nice.
I would encourage you to go and check him out on Twitter at Mr. Greyhound. It's Mister, not Mr. Hit him up. I'm sure his DMs are open. He's looking to make a quick buck, and you can get yourself some signed memorabilia from the #1 Asian/ANZ player of 2020, aka Inns.
Is it used? Is it crusty or is it?
Yeah,
like
is there skid marks, bro? Like that's
like $100 worth.
Well, you might get a bit. You might have to pay a little bit extra if you want that.
How do you think he signed it?
Oh my god! All right, well that just gets better and better. Anyways, don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much. I do want to give the shout outs to the honourable mentions. We did that at the start, but I've sort of thought of a few more while we've been going here. So to reiterate, Gas, Device, Saga, Cabal, Ricky, Usilo, Mitsuha, and Malta all got more than 5 points, but didn't quite make it into the top 20. The other ones that I wanted to shout out, I think for me, and you guys can choose a couple of your own quickly if you want as well. I know, Bleh, you have to leave, so let me know if you have to go right now or if you want to stay for another 2 minutes.
I can stay for 2 minutes.
Okay.
No worries.
So the other ones I wanted to shout out were APOC, ASAP, Hazza, Hugh, APOC, Dud, Advent. In my mind, I actually had APOC in my top 20 initially, but I took him out. I think he's had a really good year individually, and I think in my opinion, I think he deserves to be in there over Olivia or Score, personally, and Benkai and Flying. But maybe that's an ANZ bias. Same for Hazza, I will say. I think he's in the same discussion. For ASAP, Hugh, APOC, Dud, a little bit too inconsistent in my mind. For Hugh and APOC, Dud, they've had good performances at the start of the year, but they fell off a little bit during the middle, late stages. So that for me is probably why they weren't in my top 20. ASAP didn't have enough results against top tier teams in my mind, but I think he deserves an individual shout out. Along with some of the other Rooster players, but I think he was, for me, the one that sort of stood out the most. And Advent, I did actually have in 20th place, but I don't know. He's a hard one to quantify, obviously, because, he's the IGL, but he just didn't frag at all until, like, the last 2 tournaments of this year. So I think he could, you could make an argument that he could be in there as well, but he just didn't quite make the cut. Any other ones you guys want to shout out, like, that didn't make it into the top 20?
Well, I think for just generally speaking, looking at this list, like top 10, I think we can all agree is quite deserved. But the only one that's up for question, I would say, is maybe like 13 to 20. Like this was such a hard list to make, obviously because of Asian CS being what it is, and the fact that we didn't have any lands and everyone's just been siloed in their different regions playing. Like with Asia specifically, it's like it was all the big events, the DreamHacks, the ESLs were all just the same 4 teams. There was only one spot for a qualifying team, and that ended up being like D13 Tiger. Invictus kept getting invited too. So a lot of that being said, I think it says a lot, but like we didn't put many Invictus players up there, even though like they just didn't deserve it, right? They got invited consistently to all these events, but they just kept coming 3rd and 4th place. So it's like pretty obvious that they didn't deserve those invites. Maybe they did at the start of the year.
They did at the start, yeah.
Yeah, but then towards the end, it was just like, what the hell's going on? The only one that I would say that you already mentioned was Gas. Like, dude, I think Gas, if he was on like Vici or Tyloo, he'd be close to Jamyoung. This guy is insane. Like and it's hard because you don't get to see a lot of him in the big events because his team's just never there, right? But if you do like take the time to watch some of these like local Chinese tournaments, he's just insane. So he's someone that I feel, and we've asked some of the Chinese players like, what's your opinion on Gas? It's like no one really has an opinion, which is also kind of weird. Like I think he's just kind of like an outsider and doesn't really sort of socialize, or I mean that's a big thing, right? Like players like to play with people that they know and that they like as a person. More, it's just as important as like their individual skill and what they bring to the table. You have to be likable, and you have to sort of enjoy playing with this person. I think Gas just is kind of an enigma. He just kind of sits out there, doesn't really sort of fit into any sort of system, but as like raw skill, he's pretty spectacular.
Easy Death 9 wants to know what team he plays for.
I think he's Lin Vision right now.
Lin Vision's another one of those teams that's like, I kind of wish we got to see a little bit more from them. Anyway, Bleh, I'm sure you need to bounce, so I'll give you your final thoughts. By the way, for Pilsky and Nick,
not Lin Vision.
Before you run away, do you want to do? We've got some viewer questions. When Bleh leaves, do you want to stick around and do that, or should we do that next week? It'll take probably 10 minutes, I want to say. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions this week.
Yeah, sure. I can
stick around and do them.
All right. Okay, Blair, say your final piece, and then we'll close the show without you.
Top 10, 100% deserved. I feel like I agree with Nick and Pilsky as well. Like the bottom, like, you know, the 11 to 20, there's still, it's very, very hard to gauge, primarily because, like we said, you know, we don't know how these two regions are really going to stack against each other. Heck, I don't even know how Renegades are going to be, if it will fare against the likes of Vici or Tyloo, although they would be the favorites, right? So it's up in the air. A little surprised, you know, to see players like Benkai coming in. Nick, what the fuck? And then, of course, I'm a little surprised to see Flying being down there as well. Like I say, I feel like Flying in this entire list is someone who deserves to be a little bit up there, below Sterling, but definitely in the top 15. That's my personal opinion. Apart from that, I think it's very, very fair. Of course, shout out to good old, I actually, honorable mention, I forgot. I don't know if anyone of you guys mentioned this, but Advent. Good old Advent. Yeah. He might not have the fragging capability to be in the top 1,000, but you know what? It's a brains that matters. That's why Vici is Vici. And I'm not even kidding, dude. Like, take
probably
all the players in Asia.
1,000 players in China that could out-frag him.
Take all the players in Asia and Australia, put them together. Advent's probably not in the top 1,000. But that doesn't matter because he's the driving force behind Vici being #1 in Asia right now. So shout out to him. But that's it from my end, boys. I shall see you around later on.
All right. Well, goodbye, Blair. It's been nice to have you again. We'll see you next week.
Adios.
Blair's going to fuck all the cameras when he closes his, so I'm going to spend a couple of seconds to fix that one up when it does. Or, yeah, there we go. I was waiting for it. That's actually the perfect thing for him to finish on. If that's just what it's going to stick as, that's fine. I like that. That's good. All right, let's leave it like that. So Blair's still here, kind of. The viewer questions this week, and we do have one from one of the viewers.
You skipped my honourable mentions, Jordan.
Oh, you wanted to go? I thought we were done with that. All right. Go. I do actually want to hear your honourable mentions.
So I had Ustillo and Ricky both in my list, and they didn't make anybody's list.
But they got I think they got the honourable mention because they were in the honourable mention for getting points but not being in the list. Probably because of you. I
think I'll just do people that you didn't mention.
Yeah.
So 9 I had in my list as well, because I thought he was quite good on Tiger, especially in the tournaments that he won, and he's actually quite a decent AWPer. In terms of people you didn't mention, I think Zeph is one of them. He's pretty good in Australia and sometimes makes it in top 8 stats on a team that doesn't do well. Actually, surprisingly, going through some of the tournaments, DD is actually like in the top 8 of the players. The old man from Tyloo. So that's interesting. Zion also, when BTRG didn't do well, was in the top stats. Derek, when Brent were in the tournaments, was in the top stats. And Score as well I had, which he made the list. So there you go.
Yeah, a couple of good ones in there, but I think they have the issue of not having played in a lot of the tournaments. In the case of Zion and Derek and what have you. Anyways, look, I think we got a pretty good list overall. I'm pretty happy with it. Like I said, I would probably change the bottom 5. And I would, if in hindsight, now that we've had this discussion, I think I would change a lot of my top choices as well, just in terms of the order that they're there. Obviously, they'd still be in the top 20, but it's interesting. Anyway, we are going quite long. We're already at 1 hour and 50 minutes. So this is going to be by far probably the longest episode of Geographically Challenged that we've done. So let's smash through these viewer questions pretty quickly. We have one from someone in the Twitch chat. His name is 6SDFT67SDUSJ. Don't know why your name's like that. That's fucking hard to say. Anyway, he wants to know, would JKS Bntet be #1 and 2? I want to go with probably yeah. Like, it's kind of hard to say, obviously, because they play internationally, so you can't get a good gauge. But I have a feeling if they were playing domestically, they would have just fucking farmed as hard or maybe even harder than Ins and Jamyoung, for example, in the case of JKS and Dexter. So that was just a quick one. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree. Do you want to say anything there or no?
Not much more you can say to that, right? But there's a reason why they're not playing in our region.
Yeah,
So.
exactly.
They already did.
Yeah.
When a lot of these players were active. So that pretty much answers your question for you.
Yeah, that's why that's why I don't want to have them in this list, because it's just like, oh, they're going to be number 1 and 2 or whatever.
Yeah, it's totally fair. I mean, like, you can't really include them. So.
Yeah. All right. So first question then from the YouTube comments from last week. By the way, if you're watching on YouTube, you can put your comments in. Let us know what you want to hear. Also, would be interested to see in the YouTube comments people's top 20 actually this time. So if you're so inclined, drop a top 20 in the YouTube comments, and I'll have a read and see what I think. Lucas Zaykor wants to know, do you think events like WESG, eXTREMESLAND, or OMEN Challenger Series will return in 2021 when it's safe to hold LAN events? And if they do, can this help to put currently dead scenes like Japan or Korea back on the board? They used to get a dedicated country spot before. I think they can and likely will return. Maybe late 2021. I know eXTREMESLAND's doing online stuff in 2020, late 2020, early 2021. So I'm not sure what their plans are going to be if they want to have like a LAN at the end of the year like they normally do. I suspect they're probably the one that would come back of any of them. Like, they seem to be the one that's most invested in Counter-Strike. If they do come back, as to whether or not it will revive Korea and Japan, I have to say I don't think that it will. I think those regions are too far ingrained now into Valorant that, you know, you'll probably have a team that will play like from Korea or Japan in the CS tournaments, but they won't be anywhere near the strength of the ones that they used to have, in my opinion.
No, I would agree with that assessment, 100%. Like, the Valorant scene has completely taken over Japan and Korea, and it makes a lot of sense why Riot has a stronghold in a country like Korea and Japan. You know, Japan never really had strong CS teams other than Jupiter. I mean, Absolute, which is now Jupiter. But even so, like, there are a lot of players in Japan that still play Counter-Strike. So if there was an event that had like a dedicated Japanese qualifier, for example, I would expect that teams would sign up, but they're not professional teams. They're just, you know, a whole bunch of mixed teams that come together for the sake of a qualifier. And even if you had a team coming out of that qualifier, would they be able to compete with the sort of, you know, buffed Mongolian scene? I highly doubt so, you know. So it's hard to say. And then with regards to the specific tournaments, WESG, eXTREMESLAND, OMEN, probably, hopefully a ROG or something like that. One of those hardware
ROG is
brands.
not coming back, let's be real. As much as I wish it would.
Like, who knows, right? I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I think what this kind of, I'm going on a slight tangent here, but with Riot already unveiling their plans for 2021 and having like a structured system, all these TOs that kind of jumped on the bandwagon this half of the year are not going to have an option to host Riot events. I mean, a Valorant event. So we could actually see more CS events in this region coming back. And I think globally it's going to be the same sort of phenomena. Like, all these third-party tournament organizers that sort of wanted to start with Valorant, they did so because they could. But once Riot has like tightens their grip on that, like, you're going to see, you know, the open source format that CS has is going to make sure that, you know, tournaments happen. Maybe not at the same scale that they did like towards the end of last year. But again, this is all just big ifs, right? It really depends on the global health situation.
Anything to add, Pilsky?
Nothing to add, other than just, Japan and Korea are really good at cartoon CS. And I actually think, to be honest, it's better off this way. I'm actually a pretty big fan of Valorant as well as Counter-Strike. I like both of the games. And Vision Strikers and Jupiter are so much more than they were in Counter-Strike already. And I think that's good, to be honest. They have international clout. They have, all the European teams, all the NA teams. They say, we want to play Vision Strikers, who have gone on a fucking rampage in Korea, might I add. I don't think they've lost a game yet. No,
they're like the NIP of Asia, right? Like the early days of CS.
Yeah, so they went from being in our hearts, MVP PK is a special team and could have been the best team in Asia. Doesn't really mean a whole lot on the broad scale of international esports. But Vision Strikers in Valorant are a big thing. So I'm very happy for them, and I think it's better that it stays this way.
Indeed.
Yeah.
All right, hope that answers the question. He's got a couple more. These are all from Lucas. The second one is, why has no Australian Asian team besides the former Renegades 100 Thieves opted to relocate to Europe or America for a longer period, similar to the Brazilian teams or Bravado? My answer to this would be, there has been the attempt with Winter Fox, if you remember that one. So there is that. But I think the main reason is it's so much easier to qualify for things from ANZ. If you are the top, like if you're Renegades right now and you're qualifying, obviously not during COVID, but if you're qualifying for all the top tournaments, what is necessarily the incentive to move internationally? You know, if you have to then start playing in Pro League NA to try and qualify for ESL Pro League, or I guess that whole system's changed now, but you know what I mean? Like, it's a lot harder of a path than if you can just beat up on noobs and then qualify for all the big tournaments anyway. So I think that would be, for me, the main reason we haven't seen them do that.
Yeah, and it's not like Tyloo and Vici and stuff didn't go for boot camps in Europe, right? They did. But those didn't work out for various reasons, I guess. Language barrier, the coaches weren't the right fit, this and that. We've heard all of the excuses, but predominantly, it really is like specifically for Chinese players, like for them to relocate to, say, I don't know, like Poland or Ukraine or something, like a cheaper European country where they could actually, like, it's feasible for the org to sustain them, right? The players themselves wouldn't be able to stay there for very long. Like, they get homesick, they miss their food. Like, I think, you know, like you guys and myself included wouldn't feel that same way, right? We just adapt to where we are. But for these players, like, you know, they're 17, 18, 19. They've like never lived anywhere else except for China. And then you're asking them to go somewhere where they don't speak the language and the added pressure and all that. Like, I'm not trying to make excuses for them, but I'm just saying those are the reasons that they give. So it's like very unlikely that we would see. And then to add to your point, like, yeah, if Tyloo and Vici are constantly being 1 and 2 in Asia and have that kind of pre-COVID era, like, guaranteed slot into a Star Ladder or a ESL Cologne or whatever it is, yeah, why would they go and play in Europe? Because there is still the chance that a tier 2 European team upsets them, right? And like, they have that added barrier. So yeah, it's unlikely.
The next question, I'm going to skip a couple of your questions, Lucas, just because we're running short on time. We might get to them next week. I know you had a couple more, but I do just want to wrap things up pretty quickly. So Skyboy asked, top 20 teams in Asia right now, excluding ANZ. I mean, the real thing is, like, are there even 20 teams in Asia right now that are worth mentioning? I did quickly do a list just to go through. You've got Tyloo, Invictus, Linvision, Wings Up, Vici, NG, D13... Bren, Huatzai, Beyond Sigma, Tiger, Global Esports, Divine Vendetta, Checkmate. Paper X, obviously, another one. Like, obviously in no particular order. I think those are the big-ish ones. I can't really think of another one off the top of my head. Probably a couple more of the Chinese teams. But ranking a top 20 right now in Asia, I think, is quite difficult. And to be honest, for me, I would say that's a bigger topic than what we can answer in this one question. So... yeah. To me, those, like, that's just the quick broad strokes. I don't know if there's any other ones that you can very quickly think of, Nick, but those are, yeah.
No, the only thing I would say to that, like, this is not really top 20, but I think Wings Up is the most underrated team.
I think they
in
probably
Asia right
are
now.
a top 20 Asian team, by the way. Like,
yeah,
it's just
it's just that they always get cucked by Tyloo and
Mm.
Vici, and Invictus for that matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the final question for today is from Suhas U, and this one's probably one for you, Pilski. He says, when I watch Asian matches, a lot of the time the casters are saying that Team A is outskilling Team B, so what is the cause of this difference? Is it due to lack of experience against top-tier opposition or any other factor? And I suspect that he's probably heard you saying that before, so...
Outskilling them. It is a lot of factors, and there can be a lot of different reasons for outskilling an opponent. I mean, CS is a combination of a lot of different variables. I think usually when I say that a team's outskilling the other, it's usually in terms of firepower and fragging. There's a lot of different win conditions in Counter-Strike, and one of them, I guess, is outskilling the other team, which is basically just you just frag harder than the other team. You win every aim duel and you win the match. You don't necessarily have to out-tactic a team. And I think Tyloo is a good example of that. I think usually I'm referring to raw firepower, but I think it also goes a little bit into the experience / out-rotating a team. Usually it's about an individual basis of performance rather than a team or strategy perspective on a win condition.
Yeah. All right. That's the end of the episode. So thanks for the questions. Thanks for sticking around. If you're watching this on YouTube, let us know what your thoughts are on the top 20. In fact, give us your top 20. I'd be very interested in seeing what the community consensus is versus, what our consensus is. Otherwise, been great to have you guys on for this one. It's been a very, very long one, so I appreciate your time. And Bleh, obviously, he's bounced early. I guess we'll go with final shout-outs from you first, Nick.
Well, thanks for everything, and thanks for having me again, Jordan. It's been great. Always have fun. It's been a great year for... Well, I wouldn't say great. It's been a weird year. Been a year for us to all reflect, and looking forward to next year.
By the way, we're hopefully going to do an episode next week, which will be the last episode of the year. So I would like to have you on that one as well if you're available. That's going to be a bit more of a shoot the shit kind of episode as opposed to like a structured one like this. We'll do something similar to what they do on By the Numbers, where they come up with a bunch of like categories, which is like worst roster change, best event, that kind of thing. And we'll just talk shit about stuff. So that'll be fun. Anyway.
Sounds good.
For you and for the viewers, just letting you know that'll be next week, hopefully sometime. Probably Wednesday next week if we can, but we'll see.
All right.
Pilski, anything you want to say?
I'll say a lot of it next week. I'll keep it more brief this week. I am looking forward to casting one more thing before the year is out, very relevant to Asian CS. And hopefully a lot of the people that follow this podcast will also be tuning into said event. I really enjoyed putting together this top 20. I think, to be honest, the lists are not as straightforward, and it really a lot of personal bias comes into it, because there's definitely a lot of players that are on the list or in top 10 sort of status that I don't necessarily agree with, but it was definitely fun, and it's always good to have a chat with all you guys.
Yeah, it's definitely a good discussion topic. That's the main takeaway, I think. It's not necessarily this is the unequivocal, inarguable top 20, but since no one else is doing it, then yeah, I guess it is. Anyways, I'll be Bleh as well. Hire us, you cunts. Okay, that's Bleh's shout out done. And that's the end of the show. So thank you very much for watching Geographically Challenged again. We'll hope to catch you next week for our final episode of the year.